They are better than their peers. Several studies reveal that parents who keep telling their children that they are special, more so than other children, are actually producing narcissistic children. In one report, it is stated explicitly, narcissism was predicted by parental overvaluation, not by lack of parental warmth. Thus, children seem to acquire narcissism, in part, by internalizing parents. Inflated views of them, e.g., I am superior to others, and I'm entitled to privileges. This produces the grandiose variety of narcissists. In schools, these children are known as pompous children. In China, they are called golden children, children who can't walk through the door without expecting the whole world to conform to their needs. I hardly need to point out what happens when they're expected to cooperate with others. These other people might even think of themselves as number one. If so, things are likely to get quite interesting. While working on this book, I've had several conversations with teachers, and I found it fascinating to hear what teachers who work in relatively affluent neighborhoods have to say. Naturally, many children, and young adults from fortunate circumstances present as polite and well-adjusted. They are often good at showing consideration and respect for others. However, a significant number of them seem to have remarkably inflated self-images. They genuinely believe themselves to be part of some particularly privileged group, and apparently, they sometimes behave accordingly. Trauma and its effects. Several studies have also revealed that this same sense of being entitled to more than others is common in children of parents who were permissive of bad behavior and who allowed their children to run roughshod over others without even apologizing afterwards. The parents who taught their children to think of themselves as inherently amazing and wonderful creatures seemed quite apathetic about the world around them. They spoiled their children rotten, even when they behaved terribly. Nothing the child did ever had any consequences. The parents simply cheered for their children's efforts, no matter what kind of disaster they might have caused. However, parents who set boundaries for acceptable behavior raised children whose attitudes to rules and regulations were much healthier. Transgressing boundaries is a highly typical characteristic of narcissists. Another phenomenon that seems to trigger narcissistic tendencies is when parents treat their children like trophies. This downgrades their kids to mere objects to be shown off, like a handbag or car. It also teaches the child to view other people as objects, rather than as individuals made of flesh and blood, convincing the child that they are perfect as they are, better than everybody else even, while simultaneously treating the child like an object and offering no valuable feedback to help the child explore their true identity, has proven to create a complex psychological cocktail. This combination of overvaluation and neglect can produce children who exhibit narcissistic behaviors. Constantly being told how perfect and adorable you are, no matter what you get up to, but never being given any genuine feedback about your actual behavior can cause issues. You won't have the frame of reference when you need to judge what is actually okay and what isn't. The outcome will be a child who feels entitled to everything they want, regardless of whether they actually deserve it or not. Any connection to one's own performance has been lost. These children frequently come to focus excessively on a specific thing or another. It could be appearance, material obsessions, or what other people think about them. It's clear that very few, if any, parents would deliberately set out to create these little fiends by purposefully neglecting their need for balanced feedback. And, as I mentioned earlier, parenting and specific genetic variations are commonly both contributing factors. When children have no genetic predisposition to narcissism, parenting might not be as significant a factor, and so you might be able to get away with inflating their egos. The problem, though, is that there is no way to tell how children are going to respond ahead of time. This lack of certainty regarding the effects has caused some psychologists to urge caution. If things go too far, we won't be able to undo them. The damage to the amygdala that the victims of narcissistic abusers present can potentially trap them in a permanent state of fear and anxiety, and cause them to respond poorly to any environment that reminds them of their suffering at the hands of the narcissist. In other words, victims of. Narcissistic abusers are in a state of constant alertness to a danger that is no longer present in their lives. This hypervigilant mindset will also cause the children of narcissists to suffer panic attacks, phobias, and other mood disorders that can significantly restrict their ability to live full, productive lives. Should we pity narcissists? All we know for certain is that somebody who lives with a narcissist will suffer some kind of mental harm as a consequence of this relationship. Their partner's lack of empathy and morals can cause havoc for everybody they come across. Everything they do is done at the expense of others. In fact, one could even ask oneself, does the reason for my partner's narcissism matter? After writing about psychopaths, I've received comments to the effect that it isn't the psychopath's fault that they are a psychopath, seeing as they can't help themselves. They're actually completely innocent. Some even claim that the psychopath, or in this case, the narcissist, is the real victim. Why am I having a go at narcissists? It's not as though they asked to be that way, I guess. But if your baby is about to be torn to pieces by a hyena, what would be your main concern, the baby's well-being or the hyena's? Having a personality disorder does not absolve you of all responsibility for your actions. Rather, it's a reason for an individual to seek help with, regulating their behavior before they end up completely isolated. Things tend to play out in fairly predictable ways for narcissists. In many cases, people gradually cut them off until they have nobody left to admire them. In the end, everybody sees through the facade. That's the problem for narcissists, you see. Nobody likes them. Not really. 14. The challenges of narcissism. I imagine one of the reasons people cling to their hate so stubbornly is because they sense once hate is gone, they will be forced to deal with pain. James Baldwin. For the narcissists themselves, it would probably be better if their situation was curable. There is an unfortunate trap here that people seldom think of. The idea that a little narcissism might actually be a good thing is actually quite common. It might be phrased in different ways, but they all share the same general outline. In our competitive world, it's advantageous to be tough, hard-nosed, and ambitious. A strong desire to reach the top will definitely increase your chances of success. Having to step on others to get where you're going is simply an unfortunate but unavoidable side effect. Promoting yourself has become both more common and more necessary than anybody is really comfortable with. And yeah, you can make a whole career out of it if you want. Our TV screens are bursting with people who don't really do anything besides talk about themselves, show off their homes and cars, and, if we're being honest. Exhibit A, revealing degree of self-centeredness. Is it entertaining? I guess, but nobody could have gotten away with something like that a number of decades ago. Being famous for being famous wasn't a thing back then. You had to do something people cared about first. These days, you can make your name doing nothing in particular. This change has been a gradual one, and it's been underway for some time. Now, some people will do literally anything to get to be on TV. Social media provides an abundance of examples of this. My own. Improvised, intuitive explorations of the issue have revealed that a new influencer is born every 12 seconds or so. The most infamous narcissist in the world. Instead of giving you a long list of examples of this kind of personality, I thought I'd use a single one, whom nobody will have been fortunate enough to be ignorant of, Donald Trump. He is a real estate tycoon, a businessman, a reality TV celebrity star, and a general celebrity, with a long history of picking fights with people all over the place, like talk show hosts, for example. He put his name on everything he got his hands on. Trump Tower is just one of countless examples. Did you know his name has also been used for wine, water, golf clubs, airplanes, a university, restaurants, apparel, watches, vodka, perfume, and more? Although this list isn't endless, it's still impressively long. He topped his whole career off with a 4-year term as President of the United States of America. Despite all the controversy surrounding his person, he ended up being elected. Does this mean we can assume narcissism actually can help you reach the top? There are certainly many experts who have argued that his behavior gives him away as a narcissist. It's worth noting that he has a huge number of supporters. You have to invest in yourself, emphasize your strengths, and take what's yours. You might even have to trample a few other people on your way to the top. Eat or be eaten has been the rule for ages in some circles. after all. On the other hand, it could be that there are at least as many, if not far more, individuals who are more successful than he is, but whom we've never ended up hearing about. They just keep their nose down and don't worry about showing off on TV or in social media. It was hard to overlook Donald Trump even before he became the US president. Despite this, he is very obviously not the best at anything at all, apart from attracting hostility from practically every quarter. As far as I can tell, he is a world-class talent in that regard. When do I get my 15 minutes? It's not too difficult to see the appeal in seeing your own reflection and thinking to yourself that you're actually pretty great. Or pretty, hot, cool, or badass, whatever you prefer. I suppose that's why so many people post photos to Instagram, to get to read those same things about themselves. Who wouldn't like to have somebody tell them that they are totally the hottest? I don't know of anyone who's fully immune. Self-deception is a treacherous yet blissful activity. So is being the follower of somebody successful, perhaps at the expense of having to push a few people out of the way, and getting to feel how the limelight rubs off on you. All of these things can make some people feel less like failures and more successful, even if this means closing their eyes and ears to criticism and past failures. Just like an alcoholic or a thrill-seeking serial adulterer, they enjoy not having to take personal responsibility for things. Initially, the effects are all beneficial. Life's a thrill, and everything feels great. Little by little, though, the trap is closing in around them. Excessive self-centeredness and egotism are a strain on everybody else, and many find they just can't take any more. They distance themselves from anybody who exhibits too much narcissistic behavior for too long. Eventually, you'll have to face the facts. You're not really that special. You're actually much the same as everybody else. You're no Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, nor are you Kim Kardashian. Sorry. Now, don't get me wrong. There is nothing wrong with who you are. I'm actually convinced that you're a genuinely amazing person. However, you might still be headed for a rude awakening, unless, of course, you pick yourself up and start moving in the right direction. That's something else entirely. If your dream is to be successful, physically fit, or famous for something important, get to work on that instead of wandering through life trying to convince yourself that you've already arrived. The people you admire and might want to emulate didn't become who they are by chance. They worked for it. I'm not trying to suggest that they all started out with nothing. Some of them received help from all kinds of quarters, including well-meaning parents who may have had the financial means to invest in their children. However, nobody can even hold on to an existing fortune without making some kind of effort. It takes genuine commitment to make something out of even the best of circumstances. However, the majority of successful people started out almost at the very bottom. To take a somewhat strange, yet nonetheless interesting example, a significant majority of all the billionaires in the world earned their fortunes themselves. They didn't inherit a penny of it. There's no easy way to tell you this, but you're going to have to work for what you want to. Nothing is free in life. Scrolling through endless social media feeds of photos of expensive sports cars, luxurious mansions, or elegant handbags is not going to make you successful. It could make you envious, but that's about it. Ultimately, because we can only ignore reality to a certain extent, some narcissists end up struggling with depression. Perhaps by this point they will already have alienated most of the people they know. They could very well be isolated from everybody they used to know as their old friends. Saw through them in the end. These friends grew tired of all the trouble that the narcissist's inflated ego and mischief were causing, and found themselves unwilling to go on, suffering the consequences that came with their previous role as an accessory to the narcissist. Now they won't even pick up the phone. Is there a cure? Assuming you don't want the people around you to think poorly of you, is there something you can do about all this? Some psychologists still think that narcissists are misunderstood, stigmatized, and in need of treatment. They suggest that there might be some cure for people who have been diagnosed with NPD. Unfortunately, there is insufficient evidence that therapy, for example, actually has any kind of significant effect on narcissists. Treating NPD can be quite the challenge. A great deal will also depend on the individual's readiness to engage in and continue therapeutic treatments. Several varieties of therapy have use in the treatment of NPD. Let's take a look at some of the ones people tend to suggest. Therapeutic approaches for narcissistic personality disorder, NPD. The person giving the treatment An experienced psychotherapist with specialized training begins the procedure with an assessment of the subject's psychological function. In this stage, different diagnoses will be considered, along with coexisting conditions, before a treatment plan is suggested. NPD therapy is intended to do the following: help the narcissist overcome their resistance to therapy, identify narcissistic behaviors that cause problems in their life, explore past experiences and assumptions that may have led to narcissistic behavior, help the narcissist admit that these behaviors impact others, replace grandiose thoughts with more realistic ones, explore new behavior patterns, and help the narcissist practice them. Help the narcissist see the advantages of these newly learned behaviors. Psychotherapy. In one-on-one sessions, the causes of the narcissist's emotions and behaviors are explored. Understanding your past will help you focus on relevant emotions and behaviors, which will in turn make your thoughts and emotions easier for you to manage. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. Here, unhealthy thought and behavior patterns are identified and subsequently replaced with healthy ones. The narcissist will practice new skills. They will also be assigned homework to do so that they can refine these skills between sessions. Schema therapy. Schema therapy combines elements of psychotherapy with elements of CBT. The idea is to identify negative patterns and mechanisms that stem from early childhood experiences. Once the narcissist has discovered these harmful schemas, they can learn to change them. Gestalt therapy. This is another variant of psychotherapy. In this case, there is more emphasis on the present than on the past or the future. Past life experiences are viewed through the lens of the effect they have on the narcissist's life today. The narcissist is encouraged to reflect on what is going on in their life at the moment. They will work on improving their self-awareness and self-responsibility. The drawback to all these methods is that no matter how well-intentioned they may be, and no matter how well they have been designed to treat and even cure narcissists of their problematic behavior, there is simply no conclusive evidence that they have any tangible, real effects at all. If a single study had been able to verify that a particular treatment was actually effective, it would have been a huge deal. Perhaps such a study will arrive one day. It's also worth noting that there are no drugs that are used specifically to treat NPD. But the true challenge to treating a narcissist is that treatment, of any kind, hinges on the voluntary participation of the person to be treated. The real problem, the true source of the problems, is obvious. What reason could a narcissist possibly have for wanting to be cured? Cured from what? One wonders. From their ability to use other people or get their partners or parents to help them out with anything they might need? From their promiscuity? From their inability to feel regret, guilt, and shame? Why on earth should a narcissist want to be free of those things? What reason could they possibly have for wanting to lose the feeling that they are at the top of the food chain? They simply have no motivation to change. Narcissists maintain their lifestyles at the expense of other people, and they have no intention at all of stopping. Psychotherapeutic treatments are not their first option by a long shot. I often think of cats in this context. They might be the most narcissistic animals in existence. Try telling a cat what to do. Good luck trying to perform tests on them. It's almost impossible to get them to play along for more than a brief moment. However, there is one context where you actually could help a narcissist. This applies to narcissists who lack the grandiose behavior that most narcissists display. The more introverted ones, who have weaker self-esteem, function differently. These are the ones we refer to as vulnerable narcissists. They are more aware of how skewed their notions of superiority are, and they also don't harbor any illusions as to their actual superiority, however badly they happen to desire to be superior. These individuals can develop depression, and that is definitely treatable. With the right treatment, these narcissists could very well get back on their feet and return to their true selves, standing strong, tall, and proud. But they will still be narcissists. Again, this begs the question, good for whom? What I'm trying to determine here is if it would actually be a net positive for society. A narcissist in great form will do psychological harm to many potential victims before they are done. Do we really want to encourage that? Is this a simple issue? Far from it. I have no idea what the right answer is here. Regardless of this particular case, it seems that people with narcissistic Traits struggle more and more as the years go by, as it becomes harder and harder to maintain a grandiose self-image in the face of the psychological and physical realities of aging. Psychopaths are similar in this regard. Aging causes them to lose some steam, but they don't ever stop being psychopaths. Or narcissists. Part 3: How to handle narcissists. 15. The challenges of being close to a narcissist. To be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment. Ralph Waldo Emerson. What's it like to live with a narcissist? Given all the typical narcissistic traits I've discussed so far, it will also depend somewhat on who you are. Some of us are more tolerant of poor behavior than others. Since narcissists can often seem charming at first, it's not always easy to know who you're dealing with. My simplest, most basic advice is this: be on the lookout for a certain set of behavioral patterns whenever you enter into a new relationship, whether it be romantic, platonic, or professional. This chapter will be of use to you if you suspect you may actually be involved with a true narcissist, but it should also be helpful if the person you're interacting with is merely exhibiting some narcissistic behavior. It's not always easy to tell the difference, so you need to be on your toes. Now, I'm not in any way suggesting you should live your life in fear of meeting new people. All I'm saying is that it can be good to maintain a healthy, alert, and natural attitude when you're around people you don't know anything about. Think of it as being in traffic. If you think about it, traffic is incredibly dangerous. All those lunatics riding bicycles and driving cars. Still, the danger doesn't stop you from getting around. All you need to do is keep a lookout and pay attention, and you'll be fine. On the vast majority of occasions, nothing bad happens. The most important pattern for you to be looking for is whether what the person says, perhaps even repeatedly, really matches up with what they do. Naturally, all narcissists don't behave exactly the same and do all the same things all the time, but there are patterns. So, how does a narcissist behave in a relationship? You'll notice a constant state of disappointment. Their partners disappoint them in every way. They don't make enough money. They aren't educated enough. They aren't attractive enough. They're far too ignorant. They don't take very good care of the family, or their background is all wrong. Whatever they do, it'll never be quite good enough. There's always cause for criticism and dissatisfaction. Life was supposed to be a lot easier. It's enough to make you wonder why anybody would want to move in with a loser like that. Comments along the line of, "My ex was a lot better at XYZ than you," are common. It could be that the narcissist in this relationship is keeping tabs on all their exes. There is most likely a small legion of them, to see if any of them look like they're about to have some kind of financial windfall. The narcissist might stand to gain somehow, ideally by getting back together with their now wealthy ex. But failing that, they can at least ram the news down their partner's throat, always choosing the wrong side. Another warning sign is when one person in the relationship never sides with their own partner, but tends rather to side with anything or anybody against them. Whether it be a matter of taking a stand, voicing an opinion, or planning to do something. There is both a stated and an implied mistrust of the person they live with. Other people's opinions are used as evidence that their significant other is clueless. A practical example of this could be when you're redecorating the house, like fixing up a kitchen or bathroom. Whatever the other person does, however they do the work, it won't be good enough. When people come to visit, the narcissist brings up every single mishap along the way, and they might even hire a professional contractor to clean up the mess. This is an effective way of humiliating somebody. It's important to realize here that there isn't necessarily anything wrong with the work they did. The whole point, rather, is to make them feel useless and incompetent. This is a way for the narcissist to keep the upper hand. Narcissists want the best, after all, and they feel entitled to demand it too. Often they are imaginative enough to paint a vivid image in their mind of what their life should have been like, as opposed to the misery they are currently suffering. These fantasies might be about money, making more of it, or their partner making more of it, wealth and riches that the narcissist really should have received ages ago. Moving on from material concerns. This isn't limited to material possessions, however. Fantasies and daydreams could be about achieving career success, fame, and all the things that might have been. If only they hadn't taken up with that loser. Things would probably have been a lot better if they'd been with somebody else. Perhaps their ex was a lot better at arranging for the narcissist to achieve an appropriate degree of success. Perhaps they should have listened more to their parents, who warned them that this wasn't the kind of person they should spend their life with. However, if their partner were to do things that satisfy the narcissist's needs, like taking a new job that pays better, the narcissist will be in favor of this solution even if it means they will hardly get to see each other. It will improve their situation in material terms. More money coming in is always welcome news, seeing as everything they make is spent almost immediately. The partners of narcissists also end up suffering for the sins of others. They end up paying for what other people did or didn't do. It could be imagined past offenses, which the narcissists still bear grudges over. As soon as the opportunity arises, they will vent all their frustration onto their partners. Imagine a punching bag in the basement. Whenever something annoys or angers the narcissist, they can go down there and pummel that punching bag. It didn't do anything to cause offense. It just hangs there. But it has to pay for all the narcissist's baggage. This could happen in any relationship, of course, but it is highly typical of relationships involving a narcissist. What about emotions? Emotions are a complicated part of all this. Narcissists can be quite cold, and they aren't really that emotional. They like to keep their partners at a slight distance, to leave some room for doubt about their feelings for the other person. This seems to work too, judging by the hordes of people who seem to be prepared to put up with almost anything to win their acceptance. The emotional terrain can get pretty bumpy here. Just like psychopaths, narcissists occasionally shower their partner with terms of endearment, only to be completely dismissive a moment later. None of this happens by chance. It's all part of a manipulation technique. One version of this is making your partner feel guilty for wanting to be intimate with you. You shame them for having the nerve to suggest anything like that. Again, the objective here is to make the other person feel isolated and alone. Isolation for isolation's sake. Another pattern that many victims of narcissists have reported is being prevented from making new friends. When their partner makes a new acquaintance, the narcissist makes a big deal of what an inappropriate person this seems to be. Their complaints can be rather fanciful. Any kind of support needs to be cut off, because they want the partner to be isolated from other people. If the narcissist's partner were to complain about the narcissist's friends, they would simply be called a control freak. Nobody's perfect. Nobody, that is, except a narcissist. They never need to change anything about themselves. As they feel they are perfect just the way they are, there's no real need for them to take any kind of criticism seriously. Not from anybody, least of all the person they live with. However, there is an obvious double standard here. The narcissist, of course, reserves the right to criticize anybody as they see fit. Often, the narcissist will lash out at anybody who dares criticize them, and their assault can be quite ferocious. Empty threats ahead. Along with these methods, there is of course the conventional approach of threatening to leave the relationship. Although this threat might be frightening enough, there is often more to come. Narcissists also often threaten to sue or press charges against their former partners. Their complaints vary from arguments about money to who gets to keep the house, or even taking a child custody battle to court. Grandiose narcissists are aggressive by nature, and they don't mind starting a fight. Conflict doesn't bother them as much as it bothers other people. Even though they are less emotionally detached than psychopaths, they don't mind causing mischief in other people's lives. To them, maintaining a relevant threat level is an exciting challenge. If the narcissist's partner says they can take the kids, the threats might become financial instead. If there's plenty of money in their estate, you can always tell the other party to go ahead and take what they want. And since narcissists want to cause real harm, they can always threaten to spread vicious rumors about their partner, or use social media to assassinate the character of somebody who was their soulmate for 6 months. There are other signs that might suggest that the person you're living with is on the narcissistic spectrum, but I think I've covered enough of them here. As I said before, you need to be on the lookout for patterns. Remember, not all narcissists do all these things all the time. On the other hand, being regularly subjected to just 1 or 2 of these abuses might be more than enough. Realize this, if it doesn't feel good, it isn't good. You owe it to yourself to do something about it. But what? Well, that brings us to the next important question. How do you liberate yourself from a narcissist once and for all? 16th, breaking free from a narcissist. The cave you fear to enter. holds the treasure you seek. Joseph Campbell. This is where things get really complicated. Addressing issues in existing relationships, whether they be with romantic partners, relatives, coworkers, or friends. When something feels off and you don't quite know what to do about it, here are some ideas for how you could approach it. If there's anything I've learned from supporting psychopaths' victims these last few years, it's that you have to listen to your emotions in these situations. If things feel wrong, they are. What you must never do, Part 1. This next part is perhaps too obvious to need explaining, but I'll go over it anyway. The reason why I want to belabor this point is that it would be very easy for me to be all smug and suggest that this stuff isn't challenging, but it is. It's difficult. It can even feel completely impossible. And if you know that feeling, I promise I feel you. Anyway, here it is. You must under no circumstances accept any kind of abuse from a narcissist, or anybody else for that matter. Physical abuses leave visible marks, and I've explained that no immediate connections between narcissism and violence have been found so far. It's actually much more complicated than that. But I'm in full agreement with the advice women are given about men who are physically abusive. Walk away at the first sign of abuse. Any man who's enough of a spineless coward to raise his hand against a woman deserves to waste away in solitary confinement forever. This behavior provokes me on a level I can barely express with words. Don't stay. I'd also like to tell any men who are reading this that if your partner strikes you, you should also walk away immediately. This is not the right person for you. We should also address psychological abuse. I want to be very clear. About this, I'm talking about abuse. This isn't about insults or disagreements about what to watch on TV while you eat dinner on a Saturday night. After the publication of Surrounded by Psychopaths, a woman asked me about her ex-husband who was refusing to return her books to her. Well, some of her books anyway. Might he be a psychopath? No. Disagreements are a natural part of any separation. There are reasons why people grow apart. The fact that they are causing trouble for each other is no indication of psychopathy or narcissism. Being insulted is one thing, suffering psychological abuse is something else entirely. If you're regularly being put down, called names, made a fool of in front of other people, threatened or publicly humiliated, there's no reason to accept it. None of that is okay. But remember, we're not talking about comments along the lines of, "Are you wearing that shirt to the dinner party?" However rude and snobbish that might be, it isn't what I'm talking about right now. Besides, people often say things they end up regretting in the heat of the moment. Normal people calm down and apologize for their behavior. They move on. But if you're subject to regular psychological abuses, you need to draw the line. Do not accept it. Know that narcissists often plan ahead, way ahead. They might well perform their role as Prince or Princess Charming for months before they show their true colors. They will charm everybody you know on a number of different occasions, firmly establishing their image as the perfect partner. Then, once your entire family is crazy about this person you've met, they spring their trap. Look for patterns. It might start with something small, something simple that doesn't really matter too much. You might think to yourself that it was a bit of a mess, but you leave it be because you like the narcissist. You've just been put through the first test. If you don't react and question their behavior, there will be more to come. Much more. If you've been living with the narcissist for the last 20 years, you might want to consider this. Would you have moved in with them in the first place if they treated you the way they do now? Consider the last month of your relationship. Would you have moved in with them if you knew this was what you had to look forward to? If it feels wrong, it is wrong. A relationship needs a whole number of things in order to function, and some of the non-negotiable ones are trust and confidence. If you can't trust your partner, it's not going to work out. If you don't have any confidence in the person you live with, whether in all areas or just specific ones, it's not going to work out. Trust between two adults is the determining factor that gives people the courage to let their guard down and be themselves. The courage to show weakness, the courage to lose their temper, the courage to bring up difficult issues, the courage to ask for help, the courage to cry on somebody's shoulder, the courage to expose their flaws to somebody else. However, trust has a limited shelf life. You can't trust your wife or husband based on how they acted 2 years ago. It's how they acted last week that's relevant. Maybe even how they acted last night. or even this morning. It's the person they've become that you need to focus on. Trust has to be earned anew every day. That goes for you too. Perhaps you're somebody who knows that you're in danger of being seen as a narcissist by the people in your life. If so, you need to realize this. It's your most recent behavior that reveals who you are. That's how you prove yourself worthy of trust, not by referring to something you did months ago. Trust has a limited shelf life. Once it expires, the relationship is over. End of story. What you must never do, Part 2. There's another warning I'd like to give you here. It might seem tempting to be more proactive about solving your problems. Depending on your own personality and mental state, you may end up deciding to tell the world what an insufferable jerk your narcissist is. You decide to smoke them out, basically. Think long and hard before doing this, though. You're a good person, after all. You don't lie to, cheat, or manipulate people. The other person might not be like you. You might not be on a level playing field. They lack empathy, but know that you don't. You're an open target for emotional attacks that could do further harm to you. And for all you know, the narcissist might have been preparing for this breakup for years. When you call the people you think of as your allies to tell them the truth, you might well find that you're a little late to the party. I'm sure you can imagine the kinds of things the narcissist will have told all the people you care about. Although narcissists can cause a great deal of obvious harm to many people, many will still refuse to see them for what they are. That's how manipulation works. You might be thinking that this seems horribly unfair and just wrong. You'd be right. But they might also have been subjected to years of manipulative behavior. If you really want what's best for them, you should probably abandon your propaganda efforts. Letting the world know that the narcissist is less of a catch than everybody thinks might seem like a good idea. But the backlash could come swift and hard. Narcissists have a highly vindictive streak. If you burst their bubble, they will simply regroup and come after you. Perhaps they will even muster the troops and turn everybody they can convince against you. It's happened before, and the victims of this tactic don't always recover fully. Smoking the narcissist out might prove too costly then. Don't do it unless you're on incredibly firm ground. With allies, you have absolute confidence in not to waver from your side. What you can try. You need to decide whether to take any action at all. In cases where the person you're dealing with is an acquaintance, a family member, or a coworker, it's less clear-cut. If the person in question isn't in your immediate orbit and nobody appears to be in any immediate danger, you could decide to leave things be. If, for a variety of reasons that I hope at least you can understand, you decide to keep a narcissist in your life, make sure to put as much distance between yourself and them as you can. Stay out of their immediate vicinity, basically. The air gets more toxic the closer you get. Increasing the distance a little will make it easier for you to gain the narcissist's acceptance, as you won't be reacting as strongly to their antics. This can be a good way of flying under the radar. One example that comes to mind is a distant relative of mine who has a classic mean aunt in her family on her husband's side. She's a truly awful, grouchy woman who complains about everything and is always arguing with somebody. Attacking others is her way of life. She can say extremely negative things about people she's never even met. She thinks she's all-knowing, which is ironic considering she somehow believes the whole family loves her. What she doesn't know is that practically everyone has had enough of her and her hostilities. Even her own kids despise her, although they don't have the nerve to say it out loud. This aunt makes herself the subject of every conversation, mainly by constantly repeating how unfair life has been to her. There's no end to her imaginative narratives in which she is always the victim of some vast conspiracy to hold her back in life. It remains highly unclear who is supposedly the mastermind behind this plot. Her husband is visually impaired, but she won't let him listen to audiobooks on his CD player because she doesn't like having cords littering the floor. Yep, you didn't misread anything. Her needs trump his, even though this means he can't enjoy reading anymore, which used to be one of his greatest pleasures in life. This aunt passes her venom around to everyone and everything, and my relative avoids her whenever possible. Sure, he gets the odd angry phone call, but he simply listens and hangs up. He doesn't point out to her that she's a blatant narcissist. All he does is limit their contact as much as he can. If we replace the relative with a friend, the situation will be less sticky. Just don't respond to text messages or phone calls as quickly as you used to. Don't get in touch in any way. Don't comment on anything this individual posts to social media. Ignore them. Tell them you're sick the next time you're supposed to meet. All this will have a single important effect. It will make you a less appealing option to latch onto and seek to manipulate. The narcissist will look for new hunting grounds. If you meet in the future, at some social event or another, you can always be polite, just as long as you're not inviting. Don't ask any questions. Don't be dismissive, but don't encourage anything either. When the narcissist complains that you're boring, you'll know you're on the right track. The same goes for the workplace. If it's your coworker who is a narcissist, avoid all contact whenever possible. If it's your boss, find a new job. I mean it. You have no mandate over this person, and there's no way you can win. Walk away. It will work. Think about whether this might be a suitable approach for you. In the end, it might still be wisest to sever the ties completely, rather than just ceasing to care. It's certainly the safest option. What you'll probably end up having to do, if you have to face up to reality and accept that the person you allowed to get so close is actually bad for you, you'll need to resort to more drastic measures. Let's suppose the person in question is your partner. This isn't a challenge I'd wish on anyone, but many will come to some hasty conclusions after merely scanning the narcissism checklist. Let's further suppose then that the person you're living with is not a narcissist. If that's the case, you can simply bring up your complaint and ask for some improvement. If they're a reasonable person, this will work as long as you make sure they know you're serious about it. Address the conflict. It's definitely worth it. If they're a jerk, things might not work out anyway, and the solution will once again be to move on. Why give yourself a jerk to deal with? Don't use the words narcissist, psychopath, freak, or other similar terms. That would only provoke them. Nobody's ever going to say, you know what, I never thought of it before, but I think you're right, I think I'm a narcissist. Not going to happen. Forget about it. Limit yourself to commenting on behaviors. Simply come out and say it. What you're doing to me is unacceptable, and I want you to stop. Immediately. Be specific. Avoid bringing up emotions, as this will only give the narcissist more ways to get back at you. Don't say, you're always so rude to me. It hurts me quite badly. Instead, say, yesterday you told me in front of my family that you think I'm starting to look a little old and worn. That's not okay. Don't say, you treat me like a walking ATM and I find it humiliating. Instead, say, you borrowed another $50 from me last month, and you told me you'd pay me back within 3 days. Pay me back the money you owe me immediately. Under no circumstances say, when you stay out all night, I don't know what you're getting up to, and it makes me feel insignificant and unloved. Instead say, I'm not okay with you being out partying all night. That's not a good foundation for a functional relationship. Another thing you should avoid is making empty threats, because this might trigger aggressive behavior on the part of the narcissist. Therefore, don't say, I'm going to break up with you if you don't stop texting your exes. Instead, say, any real man would pay attention to his current woman rather than his past ones. So what'll it be? My advice is that you simply take out a pen and paper and write down what the problem is and how you might bring it up in the clearest, most neutral way possible. When you've figured out exactly what you're not happy with, add what you'd like to see instead. No emotional outbursts, no threats about doing this or that. Just put it out there. I'm not okay with you doing 10th I wish you would. Do Y instead. Your partner might never have thought of this. If that's the case, you might have a fruitful discussion, and things could end up better than ever between you. If your partner is of the more common, stubborn variety, you might be told that they get where you're coming from, but they still don't intend to change. In that case, at least you're free to leave. A narcissist might try to unbalance you by changing the subject and hurling accusations at you, like you're so perfect. Remember, in this sense, narcissists are pretty much overgrown children. Your partner might even say you're right and promise to improve. All you need to do then is keep an eye on what they do next. Stop paying attention to what they say, promise, or explain to you. Simply observe their behavior. That's all that matters. One of my most important mantras in life is this: compare what people say they will do with what they actually do. That's when everything comes into view. Does the change fail to materialize? Does the other person soon return to their old bullying ways? Pack your bags. There's no way to sugarcoat this. You need to get out of there. Make sure you have your allies nearby. If the narcissist has taken all your mutual friends, figure out who is still on your side. There are plenty of interest groups that shelter women who need help, but far fewer groups will take care of men in similar situations. In any case, you need to make sure you have a whole team on your side, however small. You might be too vulnerable on your own. You owe yourself this much. Your future self will thank you for it. Your future children will thank you for it. Your friends and family will gradually recognize the old you, and they will thank you for returning to them. 17. A complete system for breaking free once and for all. The answer to the problem of humanity is the integrity of the individual. Jordan B. Peterson. Do you need a more detailed plan? No problem. Here are my suggestions for the various steps you might need to take if you genuinely think you might be dealing with a true narcissist, or at least a highly skilled manipulator. This method will work on anybody, family, life partners, or people you have unfortunate encounters with at work. Break the pattern. The most common response to being manipulated is to take immediate action. This isn't always a great idea, because you might still be off balance if you're too quick to respond. It's better to wait a while and put some time between the event and your subsequent reaction. The problem with hasty reactions is that they will amplify your adjustments to the manipulator. You'll be doing the exact thing they hoped you would. This person might even understand you better than you do yourself. Think about it. Go over the events that took place. Don't follow your gut reaction. The phone is a perfect tool for slowing the pace of a conversation that might otherwise be too fast for your own good. It could be a case where somebody is trying to pressure you to agree to something you haven't had time to consider properly. Basically, they are trying to trap you into agreeing to something that could end up costing you hundreds of hours of unpaid work. Your immediate response should be one of the following. Hey, I need to ask you to wait for a minute. I'm sorry. Someone's coming. I have to go. Call me back in 5 minutes. I'm almost out of battery. I need to find my charger. I'll call you back later. Note that there is no asking for permission going on here. There's nothing rude about your behavior. You're just letting them know you'll have to get back to them later. Seems entirely reasonable. It might easily have been true too. While you're collecting your thoughts, you'll have plenty of time to think over what was actually said and how you should respond to it. If you received a text message, there's nothing to it, just don't answer. Or wait for a couple of hours first, or a week. Rushing your decisions can be costly. If you're together in the same room, things can get trickier, of course. However, there's always coffee to fetch, bathrooms to visit, or people to greet. Pick up your phone and pretend to see an email that needs an immediate response. Hold your finger to the air and smile apologetically. The effect will be the same either way. You get some breathing room and time to think. Use it. Think. Maybe all of this seems almost ridiculously simple to you. You'll see how simple it is once you've given it a try. You know that there can be consequences if you don't play along with the narcissist's antics. It's awkward. But if you can't even find the courage to try, this only goes to show how badly you need to do it. There's something that doesn't quite add up here. If you can't think clearly even after you've had a moment to calm down, you can always carry on refusing to respond. I need some time to consider what you said, so I'm going to get back to you when I'm done with that. That question requires a great deal of thought, so I need some more time to deliberate. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks for being so understanding. I'm afraid I am still unable to respond. I'll definitely be considering your proposal, and I will get back to you as soon as I'm able to do so. This sounds like an important question to me, and I'm going to need some time to give it the thought it deserves. When I have, I'll be in touch. If you're a red, you might already have moved on to the next chapter, but either way, you'll be painfully aware of how often you get things wrong in haste. Sometimes you just move too fast for your own good. If you're a yellow, the challenge will be keeping your mouth shut and not letting a load of unfiltered opinions out. Stop. Think. If you're a green, stick with what you do best. Don't respond at all. Ignore your aversion to conflict for a moment and bring out the main weapon in your green arsenal, passive-aggressive behavior. Shake your head and tell them you'll sleep on it. Don't say yes when you mean no. Now repeat that to yourself 11 times. Finally, if you're a blue, you might already see how reasonable my suggestion is. You won't have any problem staring at the manipulator while you think it all over. Silence doesn't bother you, and now you have a neat, practical solution, empirically proven. Add that to apply whenever somebody tries to get you to give an immediate response to something or other. Now, your manipulator might certainly question your behavior at this point. The partner who wants to borrow money to hold them over until payday will shout at you that they always pay their debts. Even if this is a blatant lie, your mother who will burst into tears and complain that you've grown so heartless and that you've forgotten how she used to do everything for you. Your boss might try to tempt you with some vague promise of a promotion before giving up and handing the suicide mission over to somebody else. These are manipulators we're talking about. They manipulate, they can't be trusted. Don't expect to stay calm and balanced throughout the ordeal. You might actually need to use the bathroom, for real. The respite you get might not last very long. Hostilities might ensue. Remember this, though your newfound resistance is a result of your feeling unhappy with the relationship you're in. It's dysfunctional, and you want to see a change. Be a broken record. I want you to repeat your message over and over and over and over and over. Your manipulator knows exactly how to apply pressure to you, but you must resist. There's no need to apologize or ask to leave. Simply repeat that you'll be getting back to them about 10th, no excuses are long. Explanations are necessary. Don't get engaged in some debate over why you're not responding to the original question now. You also don't need to tell them when they can expect their answer. Setting yourself a deadline might mean giving up. Control. Be consistent. Stay on message. Behave consistently. Don't change. People who do exactly what they say, they will enjoy a great deal of respect from other people. If you can demonstrate that you won't be caving into pressure in the form of tears, screams, threats, promises, or whatever might work on somebody like yourself, you'll have reclaimed control of the situation. The power of consistency is astounding. Here's the sound of a broken record, Narcissist N. Since you're so good at organizing things, I've decided that you will be in charge of a huge project that's coming up. The other line is ringing. I need to take the call. Excuse me. Breathe and decide if you want to take this suicide mission or not. Let some time go by. Try 30 seconds. Thank you for waiting. I need some time to think about your proposal. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. N. What is there to think about? Are you saying you won't take the project on? There are a lot of people involved in this. I understand if this comes as a surprise to you, validating the narcissist's actual emotions, but I need to think about it. So I'll have to get back to you. And, well, I have to say, I won't be able to wait for too long. This is a very important project, you know. Everything depends on this right now. I need your answer right away. I understand your concerns, but I need time to consider this. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. N. Getting annoyed over the unexpected resistance they've encountered. You're not listening. You're putting us in a tight spot here. We need your help. There's really nothing for you to consider. Deep breath. I understand your frustration, but I'm going to have to get back to you on this one. Goodbye. Yep. You hang up just like that. Naturally, you could just tell the narcissist to stick it from the start. The problem with doing that is that your relationship might turn sour, and you don't know for certain if they're even aware of their own manipulative behavior. The power of consistency. There's nothing like it. Deprogramming fear, anxiety, and guilt. Fear of something can be a difficult thing to carry around. Rejection, making a mistake, not being accepted, being criticized, making people angry, being ostracized. Those are just a few of the things most of us fear at one time or another. Anxiety tends to be more abstract. It may even revolve around things that never actually happen. Look back on your life to date and consider some of the things that have caused you anxiety over the years. You'll notice that only a very small portion of your anxiety was actually merited. I'm told Mark Twain once said, "I've had a lot of worries in my life, most of which never happened." In the end, guilt is the feeling of being responsible for other people's feelings, that it would be your fault if the narcissist was to get sad or feel mistreated. A manipulator will want you to be off balance and will be prepared to scream at you, threaten you, sob, cry, or play the victim and the martyr all at once, just to get you to feel either afraid, anxious, or guilty. Until now, it's worked too. But no more. Red fears. If you're a red, just think of all the things that are out of your control. What on earth are you doing? I know you don't intend to show it, but don't deny that you feel it sometimes. You're not that cold. Reds are, generally, terrified of losing control of all the important things in their lives. Yellow fears. If you're a yellow, you'll live in constant fear of rejection. If all your friends were to shun you, where would that leave you? Social isolation is one of the worst things a yellow can endure. Not being able to spend time with people and socialize all the time can be a great strain on them. Green fears. If you're a green, you'll be very aware of your fear of conflict. If somebody raises their voice ever so slightly, it makes you weak at the knees, in the bad way. You're also afraid of rapid change. You'll back down if somebody threatens to shake your existence up too much. Blue fears. Blues fear one thing above all else: public humiliation. It could be in the workplace, in a relationship, in some situation where they might appear ignorant. They'll go to great lengths to prevent this from actually happening. Making an absolute and total fool of themselves would cause them so much shame that they might never recover. What could possibly go wrong? When you've decided to break your manipulator's hold on you, you'll experience several of the following emotions. You'll worry about what might happen. You'll fear some very specific outcomes. Worst of all, you'll even feel a degree of guilt for thinking you can change. I realize that you're less than perfect, but that doesn't mean you deserve to be manipulated and deceived. While you're liberating yourself from a narcissist, you do well to consider your own well-being. In time, you'll have plenty of opportunities to work on your weaknesses and cultivate your personality. However, there's no need to do all that right now. One thing you will have to address immediately is your own aversion to these unpleasant emotions. Carrying fear, anxiety, and guilt around can be very cumbersome. Believe me, I've given all three a solid try. For a time in my life, I was a virtuoso of anxiety. However, that was back before. I realized that most of the things I would worry about never ended up happening. How do you do it? It's simple. You tackle your own discomfort head-on. In much the same way as we treat claustrophobia, you need to expose yourself to your fears in small doses. Are you afraid of riding the elevator? Look at a photo of an elevator first, that's all. Then walk inside a building with an elevator, and look at it from a distance for a while. Next, look inside the elevator for a few minutes. You don't need to step inside. Eventually, though, you'll be inside it, while somebody else holds the doors for you. You stand there for a bit before exiting the elevator again. Next time, perhaps you'll allow the doors to close while someone else is in there to keep you company. Maybe you'll ride it for a floor or two, and so on. That's how claustrophobia is treated. You face the fear, one baby step at a time. You could do it too. Put events into words. As long as the implied contract between you and your manipulator is in effect, the manipulation will be in effect too. Therefore, it is imperative that you break the contract and voice your concerns. I keep using the word manipulator because I want to emphasize that not all manipulators are narcissists. Sometimes manipulation can even be a subconscious behavior. I discuss this elsewhere in this book. If you're not sure what you're dealing with exactly, I would recommend the following approach. Nobody can read your mind. So, instead of waiting for that to happen, you confront the manipulator with your experiences. Do this just between the two of you. There's no need for a fancy dinner or any other great effort on your part, but make sure you can speak without disturbances for a while. Put what you need to express into words, to avoid misunderstanding. Each of the following phases needs to be included. Here's what you say. 1. When you describe the behavior that you want the manipulator to cease. 2nd, I feel. Describe in detail the negative emotions that this produces in you. 3. If you could stop the troublesome behavior and describe the behavior you would prefer to see in this situation instead. 4. I would feel. Explain exactly how you'd like to feel when you're with your partner, boss, coworker, mom, or whoever the manipulator happens to be. In that precise order. Your message will get through, and there is a good chance that the other person will actually listen to you. If this is somebody who is essentially decent, but has got themselves caught up in inappropriate behavior, you'll see changes with this method. Here's an example from when I was coaching an individual a few years ago. 1. When you complain about everything I do all the time. 2. I feel insufficient and useless. 3. If you could give me some positive feedback too, and even some praise. 4. I would feel that you valued me more and I would be a lot more at ease. Or perhaps this way. When you call to complain to me about feeling so lonely, it makes me feel misunderstood and underappreciated. If, instead of going on about how lonely and miserable you are, you could just get in the car and come over instead, it would be easier for me to take you seriously. At work, you might use something along the following lines. When you complain about my work performance in front of the whole firm, it makes me feel completely hopeless, and I just want to hand in my notice then and there. If you could acknowledge my efforts now and then, I'd be encouraged to develop my skills and try to do an even better job. If you're feeling particularly strong that day, you might even try something a little less restrained. When you keep complaining about your health and implying that I'm somehow to blame, it gives me stomach cramps. If instead of staying in bed to nurse your imagined afflictions, you could just get up, put some clothes on, and give me a hand in the kitchen from time to time, I might be prepared to stay in this relationship. Boom. How's that for a broken pattern? Each individual statement conforms to the formula of 1, 2, 3, and 4. Get pen and paper out and give it a try. What's the first situation that comes to mind? How does their behavior make you feel? What do you need to see more of from now on? How do you want to be feeling instead? Write down your entire script and read it out loud to yourself a few times. Refine it and think about the responses you might get. If you can predict some of the more common reactions, you may even be able to prepare answers to them from the beginning. This is called preventing objections, and it works like a charm. Practice it a few times and you'll find it much easier. Besides, you can always put a stop to everything by saying this. It's up to you if you're going to continue shouting, crying, blaming it all on me. But at least you know now how unhappy, afraid, worthless, insecure, pissed off it makes me feel. Now you've repeated something the manipulator was never expecting to hear from you. On the one hand, you've labeled their behavior a conscious choice. On the other hand, you've agreed that your emotions are your responsibility. If you had told them that their behavior is the cause of your emotions, that might have invited a discussion, which might have resulted in you being coerced into admitting that you're imagining things, that you're wrong, and so on. Destroy the manipulation utterly, make sure. There is no normal to return to. You're on the verge of regaining control of yourself, your emotions, your whole life even, and it's all going to be worth it. You'll feel a lot better if you can make your way through this step too. The narcissist, whoever it happens to be, is not going to like this one bit. Don't expect them to tell you, I had no idea. I'm terribly sorry. I'll stop doing it right away. No, making the shift from bad to good behavior can take months. And that's why I'd like to bring up the power of consistency again. No takebacks. If you've said you won't accept a certain kind of behavior, you have to stick to your guns. A truly daring manipulator might decide to call your bluff after all. You've just robbed them of a great deal of comfort. It only makes sense to be prepared for more of the kinds of attacks you've seen before. The power of consistency. When the narcissist subjects you to stifling silence, shouting, cursing, door slamming, table punching, angry looks, mocking laughter, tears, sobs being ignored, threats, or whatever worked for them in the past, you simply respond, "That's not going to work on me anymore. You can stop trying now." It might all sound something like this. "I know that you want me to pick up your slack, but your threats won't work on me anymore. I understand that you'd like me to solve your problem for you, but trying to get me all worked up and imbalanced isn't going to do anything for you. I realize that you want me to do this, but your raging and cursing have no effect on me anymore. Cut it out. Going forward, the narcissist will have to treat you with respect. Dictate your terms for continuing the relationship. If you have a manipulative boss, you have a decision to make. The wrong boss can really hold you back in life. Your career can hit a standstill. You might not have any kind of mandate to make decisions. All you can do is appeal to your manager's common sense. If your boss is genuinely refusing to listen, perhaps you should pursue other options instead. This is really a case where personal matters might actually be easier to deal with. You can always tell your partner, mother, siblings, rude aunt, or uncle by marriage that you'll be removing them from your life completely if they won't show you some respect. It's easier said than done, I know. But if you've determined that your partner is a narcissist and the relationship is making you uncomfortable, at least you'll have figured out why. If you want to avoid any unnecessary breakups, you would do well to communicate your terms for continuing the relationship. Note the idea. Here is not for you to get back at them for past injustices. You'll have to let that kind of thing go. but you do need to explain a thing or two before you can move on from the issue. Establish a framework for the relationship. Here's what I'd suggest. 1. Explain that you'll be making your own decisions about what you want or don't want to do from now on. You're going to put more emphasis on your own needs, but not to the point of neglecting your partner. 2. Explain how you expect to be treated going forward, considerately, sincerely, with more friendliness. Explain that it is high time the narcissist acted as though they valued you as a partner, daughter, lover, or whatever it may be. Explain in direct terms that you're not going to agree to be hurt anymore. End of story. 3. Set clear boundaries. Explain that you're not going to put up with any more of the narcissist's antics. Feel free to exemplify based on your observations. Don't make threats, it will only make things worse. Explain that you don't intend to get into any discussions that involve the behaviors you've singled out. 4. Ask them to recognize that your needs, principles, opinions, and values are not necessarily wrong, even if they happen to contradict theirs. Explain that just because they think they're right, that doesn't make you wrong. 5. Explain that you're expecting more from your relationship. From now on, now that you've set clear boundaries for yourself. 6. Finally, ask the narcissist, a friendly smile and big eyes might help here, to confirm that they have heard what you're saying, and ask them to commit to making an effort going forward. That's it. Again, you shouldn't expect an individual who has been manipulating you for years to just go, sure, no problem. Let's do it your way from now on. However, if you've already implemented the 5 preceding steps of your plan for reclaiming your dignity, the 6th isn't going to come as a total shock to them. Again, I can't overemphasize the power of consistency. If you choose it as your weapon, you'll be able to resolve this issue once and for all. A word of warning. There is a specific criterion that can cause this whole approach to fail miserably. Whether or not the person in question is actually a clinical narcissist who would be diagnosed with NPD. If they are, these measures will only work for a limited time. A narcissist of that kind is simply incapable of change, just like a psychopath. Which brings us back to the message from the preceding chapter. Walk away and don't look back. 18. Is missing your abuser a thing? I think it's important to realize you can miss something but not want it back. Unknown. Let's say you manage to break free of the person who's been causing you anguish for all those years. It could be a romantic partner, a close relative, a parent, or, why not, your boss. Naturally, we must all determine for ourselves how much we are prepared to accept in the way of mental or physical abuse. Personally, I believe in the zero tolerance policy. If you let little things slide, they might grow bigger. In any case, you've stuck with your plan, you've been consistent and clear, and you've genuinely done everything in your power to get the bad treatment to stop. Let's say that in your particular case, the narcissist backed down. Or perhaps you broke up, separated, or got divorced. Relationships can turn pretty toxic. It's sad, but it's also inevitable sometimes. What next? Is everything peachy now? Many survivors of relationships with narcissists have noticed that this phase can get quite challenging. Despite suffering years of mental abuse at the hands of a narcissistic partner, a person who manages to break free might actually still miss, or feel that they are still in love with, the person they left just 6 months ago. Somehow, a void has opened up in their life. This is in no way logical, it probably sounds completely irrational. However, our emotions control us more than anything else. To begin with, it might be wise to let some time go by before drawing any conclusions. What you mistook for love might turn out to be nothing, but a habitual pattern embedded in your mind. These kinds of patterns tend to fade with the passage of time. I know, this is a strange, confusing thought. Be that as it may, some people still experience their newfound freedom as a loss. So, let's take a brief look at why exactly this is. If you've ever missed somebody who you knew was actually bad for you, then perhaps you'll be able to find an explanation. First, it's simply reflective of how human beings work. We don't enter into relationships thinking we'll give it a go and see if it lasts. When we marry, for example, it's supposedly for life. We've had happy endings stuffed down our throats since before we even learned to spell Hollywood. That's why we're prepared to invest so much of ourselves in another human being. It's not meant to end. Thinking that a relationship isn't going to last makes us feel sad. Also, and this may sound a little odd, you can still love somebody, even if you don't like them very much. How your own memory deceives you. Now, we should also consider that our memory can be devious. Our brains organize things by association, not chronologically. If you experience a situation that reminds you of something, it basically doesn't matter how far back in time the memory is, you'll recall it as clearly as if it were yesterday. One technique that narcissists use to give the appearance that they are the ideal partner is to engage in a very intense courtship. This could involve anything from giving their partner flowers every other day, or taking them out to nice dinners, and showering them with little gifts and declarations of love early on in the relationship. This is intended to do one thing: create a false sense that you are appreciated. It works too. You're bound to remember it, because it's very possible you've never experienced anything like it before. Even if it was all fake. For example, seeing a bunch of flowers right after a separation can bring back memories of all the flowers you received during the love bombing phase. Your early days with a narcissist made a strong impression on you, and you're still feeling it. Flowers, text messages, stolen kisses, and passionate nights. It's all there, inside your mind. However well you may have internalized your rational realization that you were being manipulated, the feelings remain. Bad things can make you feel wanted and loved too. For example, in the context of a romantic relationship, jealousy is an emotion that involves worrying about competition for your lover's attention. Psychologists have claimed that these emotions might stem from childhood memories, like being completely or partially neglected in favor of a sibling, for example. A skilled manipulator might offer any of these things as an explanation for their jealousy. Poor self-esteem can play a major role here, but as we know, it can be feigned. It can also cause you to feel sorry for your narcissist. Jealousy. When you sense that the narcissist is exhibiting jealous, possessive behavior, which is obviously a negative, you might very well mistake this for true love, or a genuine fear of losing you, and this might be very attractive to you. It makes you feel special, and suddenly you find yourself believing the narcissist's fantasies about how special your future life together is going to be. The sense of grandiosity the other person is carrying around can even rub off on you. If the narcissist criticizes you, you might take it as evidence that they truly care and genuinely see you. At least you weren't invisible then. Not like now. Now you're not triggering the slightest bit of jealousy in anybody. Who are you even anymore? And here's a troubling thought. You might experience some pangs of jealousy yourself, which are directed at whoever your old abuser is presently wooing with endless declarations of love. Resist this. Remind yourself of all the pain you've suffered at their hands. We all have some redeeming qualities. There are other reasons why you might miss your former abuser, however. Of course, it's entirely possible that the narcissist possessed some other characteristics, which weren't altogether bad. They might have had a wonderful sense of humor, for instance. Some of them might be good listeners, or good at making you think they're good listeners. We shouldn't underestimate the significance of physical attraction here either. It's a strong reason why people stay together. Even though everybody pretends to only care about inner qualities. Imagine if this person was the most beautiful or even sexy individual you had ever seen. Narcissists are often believed by themselves, at the very least, to be more attractive than the average person, but this mainly comes down to the effort they take to look good. There is no evidence at all to suggest they have better than average looks. However, confidence is an attractive quality. I'd have to say I consider this to be well documented. Particularly among males, alpha male behavior seems to be quite attractive to prospective partners. On an intellectual level, we might question this, of course, but our nature is sometimes difficult to resist. No longer being the object of this kind of person's attention can sometimes cause a sense of abandonment. As narcissists aren't the only people who follow patterns, there's another thing to consider here. You might also find yourself constantly attracted to the same kind of people. We can't rule out the possibility that the narcissist you just left reminds you of some other narcissist from your past. It could be a parent, an older relative, a past boy or girlfriend, or anybody at all who has mattered in your life. Maybe they behaved similarly to the person you just broke up with. Or maybe it has to do with how invested you are in the individual in question. Here, I'm thinking of all the time you've spent thinking about them each day, daydreaming about what's going to happen, planning how to express yourself so as to be understood, and satisfying them in whatever ways they require this week. Perhaps you used to spend a lot of time tidying your house in order to please your narcissist. However, you should also factor in time spent hoping things will improve, worrying about what mood they will be in when they get home. Angry, happy, or anything else, it's all out of your control. Basically, narcissists can be pretty hard work. The worse they are, the more time you'll end up wasting on them. Once they're finally out of your life, it can leave you feeling quite empty. Strong feelings tend to live on in people. Negative experiences are easy to recall. Neuroscientists have recently figured out why we are more easily controlled by our negative emotions than by our positive ones. It turns out that it's all a matter of survival. Fear has a greater role to play in your survival than happiness does. If you don't know fear, you'll get eaten because you won't respect danger. However, if you're unhappy, that won't pose any immediate threat to your existence. Everything gets even more complicated when you consider all the negative experiences you've shared with your narcissist. In some bizarre way, you're connected through the pain your relationship has caused you. The dreams your narcissist tricked you into believing, all the things you thought were in your future, all the promises you were given of freedom, travel, fine things, children, love, and growing old together. If you're something of a romantic, it will hurt a lot when you realize that you're still waiting. You've been living on the hope that things would change soon, but soon never came. Sometimes you might just want to get to enjoy sharing these dreams again. But more than anything, I think this longing, or even love, for somebody who spent such a long time being a genuine threat to you is caused by an addiction you've developed. You've given up the narcissist for the same reason people give up drinking. You've realized that the short-term pleasures don't make up for the long-term costs. The curse of AA. You're much like a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Even now, after 1, 5, 10, or even 20 years of sobriety, you can still feel that itch. That's why AA members never touch a bottle again once they've broken free. They know they would only relapse. There's no such thing as just one. Drink. You don't need to mourn this. You don't need to feel miserable, but if you do, that's okay too. If any of this resonates with you, all that tells us is that you're human. There's nothing wrong with you. You're just as you should be. Maybe getting divorced is a bit like dying after all. Then let it be. It's okay to grieve. Allow yourself to. One thing left to do. If you'll allow me the liberty, I'd like to tell you what to do once you've managed to break free of a narcissist. Increase your distance from the person in question as much as you possibly can. Physically, geographically, emotionally. That's the only way you'll manage to hold on to your new freedoms. Walk away and never go back. Never. Never. 19. Linda revisited an analysis of her behavior. Courage is what it takes to stand up and speak. Courage is also what it takes to sit down and listen. Winston Churchill. Do you remember Linda, whom I discussed earlier in this book? Feel free to go back to that example and see if it reads any differently to you this time. Let's indulge in some speculation on the future of our fictional Linda. Behaving as she does isn't exactly endearing, but that doesn't make it a crime. The consequences can be dire, however. For a start, she's probably not going to start working until her parents decide to cut her off. When she hits 25 or so, her mother may finally have managed to convince Linda's father to close his wallet. Maybe. They have other children. They can't give all their time and resources to the squeakiest wheel all the time. So, Linda applies for a job, fully convinced that she will be offered it. It might work. Many employers value confidence. Let's say she gets the job then. Does this mean her personality will suddenly magically transform from the immature, sullen teenager she has been, and she will become the wiser, more responsible adult she really ought to be already? That's quite a question. Here's what I would expect to happen next. Linda gets to work. However, she's still in the sabbatical mindset, and it's not like she ever had to make any effort before. So she carries on as usual. Late mornings, early evenings. However, the difference between a workplace and a university is pretty significant. At school, your job is to learn. In a way, you're investing in yourself. Nobody else really cares how you do. In a workplace, on the other hand, your job is to invest your time in the business. You might be expected to put in at least 8 hours each day, 5 days a week, 40 effective weeks a year, or something like that. If you've never had to do this before and have grown accustomed to getting by on the charity of others, this can be quite a change. Many young people have experienced this challenge before. The majority of them have accepted their situation, picked themselves up, and risen to the challenge of their adult responsibilities. In other words, these things tend to work out okay, more or less. Linda may be able to get away with her late mornings and early evenings for a while, until her colleagues let her boss know what's going on. Or perhaps the boss will notice it herself and ask Linda to join her in her office for a chat. What's the problem? Naturally, Linda promises to do better, but not without managing to squeeze in some reasonably acceptable excuses for her behavior. She's used to faking things to get her way. Why should this situation be any different? However, a week later, her boss is back in her hair. She's diligent when it comes to following up. She went to the management class. Didn't you say you'd be trying harder? Linda sees it differently, though. She's used to having to fight for what she thinks of as rightfully hers. She goes home and cries about it to Daddy. Her boss is such a meanie. Her demands are so unreasonable. Next, Linda asks if maybe her dad could have a word with her difficult boss. Just a little phone call, like he's done countless times before for her. He loves his favorite daughter, doesn't he? Her father, who lives in reality, explains that this is out of the question. Work isn't school. She's in the private sector now. You either perform or you go home. After all, this is the profession she went to school for 4 years to learn. And this is what all those tuition fees were for. However, he wants her to explain how she ended up in this situation. Linda goes into her usual spiel. She insists that she really has done her best. No matter how hard she works, all she gets is criticism. She doesn't get it. However, her father knows his daughter. He knows in his heart of hearts that she hasn't done her best at all. He tells her the only thing a responsible parent could say in this situation: you'll have to get your head straight. Grow up. At this point, Linda throws a violent tantrum and threatens to kill herself if he won't help her. He's lost track of the number of times she's tried this before. Dad stands firm. She's an adult now. She'll have to fix this situation herself. Linda storms out of her family home and spends her whole trip home wallpapering her social media with the news of how badly life has treated her. She deserves better than this, but no support is forthcoming. Her real-life friends, who have all grown up by now, have already turned their backs on her. They've seen through her and know she is a fraud. Her boss doesn't relent either. She insists on receiving the services she's paying Linda to provide. If Linda can't do that, she'll have to leave her job. Get your act together. Here's a question to reflect on. How did Linda end up in this situation? She was a smart young woman with nice, generous parents who was raised in an average middle-class home without any special challenges. She had the peaceful, secure upbringing many can only wish for. What went wrong? Which narcissistic behaviors can you identify here? What do you think constitutes true narcissism? And what is simply ordinary spoiled brat stuff? How did she become the person we see before us? Is it possible that Linda herself is not to blame for the way she behaves? What if there are other explanations that we haven't even considered yet? Was she born that way, or did something make her that way? If it's the latter, what's the cause? Part 4, a narcissistic culture. 20. When the problem affects more than just a few individuals, the world suffers a lot, not because of the violence of the bad people, but because of the silence of the good people. Napoleon Bonaparte. Up to this point, I've been discussing narcissism as the object of more or less scientific study. My examples of narcissistic behavior, whether they be individual or collective, as in the last chapter, are clear in that context. Naturally, we all recognize many of these patterns too. We've seen them, we've experienced them, and we've probably even engaged in our own share of narcissistic behavior in the past. I know I have. And the more I learn about the unflattering reality of narcissism, the harder I try to avoid it. Of course, talking about yourself is fine, but it's a good idea to know that you can very easily over-deliver in that regard. The trick, as you might have guessed, is to figure out where exactly to draw the line. It's no easy feat. In the last few years, the issue of the spread of narcissism has been much discussed. It all began with a book, The Narcissism Epidemic by Jean M. Twenge, Ph.D., and W. Keith Campbell, Ph.D., which was first published in 2009. The thesis here was that narcissism has reached beyond the domain of the ordinary clinical diagnosis. Even people who aren't narcissists in any way have suddenly begun to exhibit behaviors that seem suspiciously narcissistic. Basically, the pathology seems to have been introduced into our culture, wanting to be seen, to claim more space, to promote oneself in more or less obvious ways. I tend to think they had a point. But before we get into this subject, I want to point out that some people believe that this couldn't possibly be explained as a cultural phenomenon. As usual with matters of human psychology, consensus has proven to be an elusive goal here. Some claim that the time we live in simply gives people no choice but to fudge the details of their resume. It's the only way to compete with all the other frauds out there. This faction tends to conclude that no fault lies with the individual. People are basically forced into this kind of behavior. It's what everybody expects of you these days. This idea has spread like a plague, particularly among younger people. However, I do agree that it seems wrong to be calling people narcissists just because they've adapted to changing rules. I can buy that. But on the other hand, if it isn't the individual's fault, and it's really all just a matter of people choosing to adapt to new circumstances, if, in other words, it's the culture that has grown increasingly narcissistic, then what's going on exactly? Can we simply refer to the whole phenomenon as a narcissistic culture? And might it not then be true that narcissism is on the rise, as Twenge and Campbell claimed back in 2009? I'll readily admit to finding this a difficult question. However, it seems too important for me to ignore, so I'll pursue it. Is there really a chance that narcissism is on the rise in our society? Consider my arguments and make up your own mind. Next, we'll be looking at what happens when the concept of narcissism is applied on a social level and what this might give rise to. As you read the following discussion, try to consider it in the light of this question. How much narcissism can the system handle before IT breaks down? That's the obvious challenge here. We can't compare narcissism to schizophrenia, for example, as the ill effects of that disease mostly impact the person suffering from it. Narcissism is not a mental illness, it's a personality disorder. This means that narcissism isn't some isolated phenomenon that only impacts a small percentage of the population. Some researchers claim that between 15 and 20% of us are narcissists. How would that even be possible? If we know anything about narcissists, it's that they have a peculiar self-image. As I demonstrated in various ways in part 1, they are highly infatuated with themselves and they genuinely feel superior to the rest of us. The question is whether you can act inappropriately from time to time without being a full-on narcissist. What would it mean if somebody who was essentially like you or me began to focus on themselves to an unhealthy degree? How far could things really go before they unraveled? How powerful are the defense mechanisms we rely on as individuals? Believing in yourself is a nice feeling. If you genuinely believe in yourself, you'll try something more than once before giving up. You'll keep going over and over because you actually believe that you'll make it. As many could report, liking yourself is a lot better than disliking yourself. But is there a point where it might have gone too far? Is it possible to like yourself a little too much, even for those of us who aren't narcissists? To answer that, we'll need to take a look at the big picture. After having studied individual narcissists and expressed our outrage over their amoral behavior, we need to allow for the possibility that this problem may reach beyond different individuals, and that the scope of our investigations might need to be expanded. There are two kinds of narcissism. On the one hand, there is the kind of narcissist who would fit the defined diagnosis of NPD based on the specific criteria it involves. On the other hand, we have all the people who exhibit narcissistic behavior from time to time, or all the time, without necessarily fulfilling the diagnostic criteria. That's precisely what I and many others call a narcissistic culture. Behaviors that are undoubtedly narcissistic, but have become so common and accepted that they have been integrated into our culture. Part of our zeitgeisty, if you will. Is narcissism on the rise, or are we imagining things? A U.S. study was carried out involving 37,000 college students, and the results showed clearly that since the 1980s, narcissistic behavior had been increasing just as rapidly as obesity. 1 in 4 college students agreed that most of the criteria on a standard checklist for narcissistic traits applied to them. These behaviors haven't really been associated with any specific clinical diagnosis, and having so many individuals suddenly develop full NPD seems highly unlikely, of course. So there must be some other cause. On top of this, the increase seems to be accelerating and occurring at a greater rate in this decade than ever before. Researchers believe that there is a narcissistic culture of some kind, hiding just beneath the surface. It could actually influence both people who do exhibit narcissistic behavior and less self-centered individuals who don't. As this problem is by no means limited to the United States, I thought I'd introduce you to an idea you may never have even considered: a narcissistic culture. Jean M. Twenge and W. Keith Campbell argue that narcissism, just like any ordinary illness, is caused by certain factors, spreads through certain channels, presents a variety of symptoms, and might be alleviated somewhat by prophylactic therapies and cures. They suggest that narcissism is a psychological plague rather than a physical disease, but that the analogy works surprisingly well. Just like the obesity epidemic, this supposed affliction has different effects on different individuals. More people are overweight than ever before, just like more people are narcissists than ever before. However, that doesn't change the fact that plenty of people get a healthy amount of exercise and maintain a good diet, or that plenty of people are able to behave considerately and maintain a humble outlook. Less self-obsessed individuals have seen narcissistic behavior on TV, online, in real-life situations with people they know, and even within their families. Even the ones who don't get carried away after seeing it will have come across it, and will thus be influenced by it to some degree. It has become more common for people to use the word narcissist as an invective, just as the word psychopath is sometimes used as a general term of abuse. However, it's rather difficult to find any scientific evidence of narcissism outside the world of academia. There are plenty of books on the subject of narcissism, but there is still a dearth of precise evidence in favor of one particular theory or another. Often, you end up having to draw your own conclusions based on your observations, and that's what I've done in this book. It will probably be decades before we can confidently say we fully understand psychopathy and narcissism, if we ever will. Narcissism is an attention-seeking term, and I don't use it lightly. This book is full of examples of different narcissistic behaviors, and I refer to various studies. Now that I'm moving on to discussing narcissistic culture, things are going to get even more complicated. Cultural narcissism is potentially even more dangerous because it appears to be becoming more common. At least that's my own opinion, which I've arrived at after spending the last 2 years learning about the problem. Naturally, many of the things I am discussing here occur in most individuals who would be given the regular NPD diagnosis. Narcissism isn't merely a case of excessive confidence or a healthy sense of self-worth. As we've seen, narcissists go beyond being confident. They literally have an irrational faith in their own abilities. They are also much less interested in having close emotional relationships, a trait that distinguishes them from people who have regular confidence and self-esteem. 21. Expressions of a narcissistic culture. Attack the evil that is within yourself, rather than attacking the evil that is in others. Confucius. Let's take a closer look at what a narcissistic culture might be like and see if you agree with my conclusions. As I mentioned in the previous chapter, I'm not discussing people who would receive the full NPD diagnosis, but rather a set of phenomena that should be regarded as narcissistic based on the checklists and criteria that have been used to diagnose narcissism. Here's an example: the less than perfect role. Models. In Sweden, we have certain people who have made careers out of basically being good at one thing, making negative statements about other people. However, this can be done more or less gracefully. Poorly spelled posts on social media are one extreme, while established writers will be able to express themselves more forcefully. The purpose is the same, though. If you have a way with words and time on your hands, you can do a lot more harm, especially if you've somehow acquired a large platform. Sweden has a bunch of popular bloggers and podcasters who've spent years messing with whomever they set their sights on. To protect any sensitive egos out there, we can refer to them all collectively as Bruno the blogger. It's hard to do justice to the mischief Bruno has caused collectively over the years. He's tried to rob so many people of their respect and prestige. This also happens to be a bit of a trap, as it only attracts more attention to the phenomenon. He's targeted Swedes of every class, the royal family, professional football players, business leaders, single mothers, his neighbors, and his own former spouses. You get the picture. Anybody could find themselves the target of a Bruno the blogger hit piece, because that's all he writes, or all she writes. Female bloggers can be mean too. Bruno the blogger. Bruno the blogger is occasionally quite a celebrity who writes for major newspapers. He's often part of the trendier crowds. From time to time, one of his TV appearances is canceled because of something he's said or done, and this makes him angrier than anything else. But this is simply another pattern we recognize from the clinical narcissists. Bruno gives himself the right to mock, ridicule, humiliate, or mess with anybody he likes, for the ostensible purpose of trying to get a laugh. Bruno seems to feel people need to grow thicker skin. In some ways, I have to agree. I don't think this is a good time to be overly sensitive. But if anybody pays him back in kind, his demeanor shifts completely. Whenever somebody has a go at him in the media, he immediately launches a ruthless counterattack. Sometimes Bruno has a run-in with one of his peers. This is like Christmas for the mass media. The headlines write themselves. Remember, Bruno has a huge audience. Why aren't more people expressing their horror at how all these Brunos are behaving? Is it because they are paid to be mean, or is it because they do it for no real reason? And why do people take such enjoyment from being cruel to one another? What does that say about our current culture? A Bruno will soon realize, the more vicious, cold, and heartless my statements get, the more my readers enjoy them. I find myself despising my own followers more and more. There we go. That's as good an example of narcissism you could get. The audience, the fools, don't know any better. On the other hand, Bruno's fans are his lifeblood. He wouldn't exist if it weren't for them. This is a good time to go back to our checklist of narcissistic traits. Callousness and lack of empathy is one of them. We should remember, too, that a narcissist feels entitled to behave any way they like because they feel superior to the rest of us. What's the danger here? If you have this disposition, every time you get away with something, you'll feel the urge to try something else. And what might seem entirely innocent at first glance could soon lead to other things. A professional soccer player's fans are young girls and boys who want to play soccer and become pros one day too. This keeps the soccer academies busy in the summertime. An actor attracts admirers who would also love to be on the silver screen. Many people would love to work in theater, film, or TV. A celebrated musical performer attracts people who would like to write and perform music. The Idol series of reality shows is successful for a reason. A best-selling author attracts large numbers of people who dream of being writers. Author is the #1 dream profession among Swedes for some reason. Creative writing classes are popular, and our annual book fair is one of our largest trade fairs. Successful entrepreneurs attract people who want to start businesses. Startups are common, and many entrepreneurs end up making the leap after hearing various success stories. What do vicious bloggers and narcissistic podcasters attract? I wonder. And what kinds of behavior are they encouraging in others? You get my point. Social media and cultural narcissism, are they connected? Let's assume, hypothetically, that we all have some kind of drive that makes us susceptible to deceiving ourselves into thinking we're somehow special and a cut above everyone else. What dangers would exist around us, and what would we need to treat with caution? Much of what goes on in social media actually defies all rational explanation, until that is, one considers the mechanisms of narcissism. That clears up some things a great deal. Many people go around dispensing facts about themselves that nobody ever really asked to hear. I'm not the first person to joke about what things would be like if people walked around town loudly declaring what they had for lunch, or what they think about some celebrity's new sneakers. The comparison isn't entirely fair, I suppose. An accurate metaphor would actually involve calling all the people you've met at least once in life, and whose phone number you happen to have to deliver the same message. It's at least selective to that extent, if we're being honest. As a social media presence mandatory? Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? If narcissism has become an integral part of our culture, how could you not be present? Would you even exist if you weren't on social media? In defense of social media, I might mention that nobody forces anybody to watch, read, or comment on someone else's posts on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, or Twitter. So, if I'm one of those boring types who takes offense at seeing others act out like that, what am I doing on social media in the first place? It's just like when you're watching a TV show you don't enjoy, you can always change the channel. Nobody's forcing you to write an angry letter to the producer. You could even just turn the TV off. That's actually a pretty good idea. I do it myself quite often, and I haven't suffered any adverse effects so far. But sure, I use LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. I don't do it. Because I find it enjoyable, I actually tend to feel a little down after spending just a few minutes using them. However, as a writer and lecturer, I keep getting told that I simply have to have an online presence. Like I said, if you're not on social media, you may not even exist. Until you have a sufficient number of followers, you're simply deluding yourself into believing you exist. Personally, I'm quite bad at it, unfortunately. I don't feel genuinely passionate about posting advice and tips on these platforms, and I suspect that my small band of brave followers have actually caught on to that fact. I'm also not too comfortable talking about myself and my personal life. Showing people pictures of myself in various situations just makes me feel silly, which doesn't help anything. I'm in no way claiming that my way is the right way. All of this is just a matter of personal preference. There are obviously some really great things people use social media for. Spreading information and important ideas is one of them. Engaging in interesting discussions with people you disagree with is another. Trying your ideas out on your network. It's not always easy to solve the logistics of getting people together for a talk. And you can discuss something with 10 people at once in a single thread. Even just staying in touch is valuable. If you don't want to call your friends, you can always send them a text. The possibilities are endless. So what's the appeal of social media? What's in it for us? Lots of studies have set out to investigate this. Most of them have made rather obvious findings along the line of humans are social animals, and we enjoy communicating and interacting with one another. On the other hand, it's not like that began with social media. And the pictures we share of ourselves online, on your own favorite platform, for example, are not always, how do I put this, accurate representations of objective reality. Adding a filter to your photos is a great way to appear younger and better looking. The art of photo editing is an interesting one. However, we've known for a long time that we do it for other reasons. We want to look more tanned or less acne-ridden or slimmer or whatever it is. Of course, the technology works just as well for making people less attractive, but based on my own research into the subject, there aren't many examples of people doing that. The same people who spent decades tut-tutting the touched-up pictures of models in glossy magazines are now routinely adding a bit of pizzazz to their snapshots from dinner with their happy families before displaying them to the world. Although why anybody would want to post their pics to the internet is beyond me. Once you post them, they're not going away. Ever. They will be eternally stored on a server somewhere, even if you change your mind and delete your post. Maybe I'm just being old-fashioned. Maybe I just don't get how exciting it is to see everybody's homes and dinner plates at the end of the day. That's probably it. I probably just fail to appreciate all this stuff. That's kind of my point, though. These days, this narcissistic inclination has become so common that nobody ever questions it anymore. It's become a part of our culture, basically. Social media took off when people started taking photos of their lunches. This has been the subject of quite a few jokes over the years, and I can see why that would be the case. Here's an amusing anecdote from lunch. I think it was 2 years ago. There are 2 girls sitting at the table next to me. They look about 16 or 17. When their lunch arrived, they styled it, adjusted the plating, then proceeded to photograph their plates from every possible angle, worrying loudly that the pics weren't coming out right. They worked on their pics for a good 15 minutes, and then posted them on some platform or another, complete with chirpy posts and catchy hashtags. One of the girls was very anxious to see what people would say about her pasta. The other one soon commented that her pasta was cold. She summoned the waitress over to complain. The waitress calmly explained that if they had started eating when the food was served, it wouldn't have gone cold. The selfie bug. This stuff is all very amusing. I've seen people elbow their way into violent demonstrations just to get a selfie. Among the chaos, I've seen a guy standing on the bed of a truck that was going 70 miles an hour just to get a selfie, hanging upside down off the side of a bridge, standing in front of a car that ran off the road, and standing on a pedestrian crosswalk with a barbell loaded with weights. Perhaps the idea is to show the world what a fascinating person you are. I'm not claiming to know what the deal is in each individual case, but there has to be some explanation for this behavior. The Ice Bucket Challenge. Back in March 17, 2016, there was a fundraising drive in support of research into Lou Gehrig's disease, or ALS. The idea was that people would raise awareness and help gather donations and either show proof of their donation or be doused with a bucket of icy water. Naturally, people felt compelled to film it all and post it online. As these things go, it was really quite innocent and fun, and the cause was a good one. But I doubt it would ever have worked without a healthy dose of narcissism in the mix. If nobody had been prepared to either show off their donation or be seen with a bucket on their head, this whole goofy trend would have been dead on arrival. Countless people make occasional donations to different charities from time to time. But apparently, some people will only give change to a homeless person if they get to film themselves doing it. The Psychology app. Work here is fascinating. Where does someone get the idea they need to announce how virtuous they are to the world? Why is it not enough to just be a good person? Whom do we measure ourselves against? Even the names of the different social media platforms can be revealing. MySpace, one of the early ones, really said it all. Facebook is perfectly named. It's all about being seen as your very most presentable self. Early on, YouTube's slogan was, broadcast yourself. Sure, why not? Maybe I should do it from my individual phone. Different generations are on different platforms. It would be quite pointless for me to get into what age groups frequent what platform, because whatever I write is bound to be outdated by the time the book heads for the printers. It's obviously become part of our culture for people to promote themselves and keep presenting the best possible versions of themselves. There's no longer anything unusual about reporting every move you make or don't. Why wouldn't all 567 of my followers be interested in seeing my new sneakers from 11 different angles? With a bit of luck, somebody will get envious, and then I'll know that I'm better off than at least a few people. The problem is that the narcissist will have to resort to increasingly extreme measures to assert themselves. A century ago, all they needed to do was look across the road and compare their fields to their neighbors. If the neighbor looked like they were doing better, that could be upsetting, of course, but at least you could walk over and ask how they did so well with their harvest. Often, that would be the end of it. You had a single rival to outdo if that's what you were into. It's different now. I hold in my hand a tool that gives me access to all of creation. No exceptions. Everybody reveals everything. Only an improved, touched-up version. Hardly anybody writes a Facebook post about their disappointing Friday night or the Sunday roast they burned to a crisp. The heart-wrenching arguments with your mother-in-law during Christmas dinner get edited out of the official narrative. Kids with runny noses or dogs with upset stomachs are non-starters. Who wants to see that stuff? Nope. Online, we're all beautiful, in great shape, successful, popular, inspiring, dynamic, and, most of all, tremendously happy. Just like the narcissists always did, we now all find ourselves trying to present a perfect picture of ourselves. And what do you do when the whole world is your point of reference? For example, as I write this, in December 2020, Facebook has 2.7 billion users worldwide. That's more than every third person on the planet. As I see it, we have three options here. 1. We could break down and get depressed over how everybody else is so much better, more attractive, and more successful than we are. 2. We could just ignore the whole thing. Watch the show without participating. Or we could just log out completely. Pretend it's 2005 again. 3. We could decide to join this race and look to get a competitive edge by any means necessary. The final choice will be a lot easier if you have a healthy dose of narcissism in your system. This makes sense. These platforms are ideal for self-lovers. Who can take the hottest selfies? Who has the most friends? Who has the best house, the most attractive partner, the most amazing vacation, and the most illustrious career? Who's taking the time to keep putting this information out there too? This has been studied in depth. There is no doubt that people who score high for narcissism are masters of self-promotion, making superficial acquaintances and emphasizing their best qualities. including a few fictional ones. Many of us also see through our friends' more, shall we say, solipsistic tendencies. Others fail to, though. I wasn't fully immune myself. Why did I have so few Facebook friends? Compared to everyone else, only 136 friends? Others had 5,000. How embarrassing was this? I must be so repulsive. It took some time before I realized that those friends people were showing off were just long lists of names of people who couldn't possibly be genuinely acquainted with the person at the center of the whole thing. Perhaps it would be better if we referred to them as contacts. If you think about it, it's probably quite unusual to have more than 5 close friends in real life. I've never really had huge groups of friends in real life either. I was always better at maintaining a smaller number of deeper relationships. But that whole friend collecting thing was something that happened during the infancy of social media. These days we've moved on to comparing our numbers of followers instead. And a follower could be anybody who pays any attention at all to what I'm doing. The most sociable person on Instagram right now is a football player named Cristiano Ronaldo. Just under 250 million people follow his everyday adventures through their smartphones. People can't get enough of watching him drive his Bugatti, it seems. Second place goes to singer Ariana Grande, who has close to 210 million followers. Third is actor and entrepreneur Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, with just over 200 million. The Rock was named the nicest person in the world during the holiday season of 2020. I like him too, but I couldn't possibly tell if he's the nicest person in the world or not. I've never even met him. Facebook belongs to Ronaldo again, where he has more than 122 million followers. Second on Facebook is singer Shakira, with about 105 million followers. And third is actor Vin Diesel, with just over 103 million. On TikTok, it is Zach King, with about 67 million followers. I must confess that I'm not familiar with his work, but I'm sure he's a fine young man. Twitter is dominated by former President of the United States Barack Obama, who has more than 130 million followers. You and I have our work cut out for us then. And as I said, you'll need to pull something special out of the hat if you want to be competitive. Basically, social media causes some kind of endless social inflation. If humanity were to be judged based entirely on what goes on in social media, we would definitely seem significantly more narcissistic than we actually are. A few years ago, an American university carried out an extensive study of which strategies perform well online. Frequent posters are rewarded. Ideally, you should post several times a day. Just don't offer anybody any real help or ask any questions. Either will be punished immediately. The study concluded that what people wanted to see more of online was superficial exchanges rather than any in-depth discussions. There are certainly exceptions, and I would guess this is at least in part a generational phenomenon. Whatever the truth may be about that, we can no longer deny that there is a great deal of demand for superficial fluff. 22. A literal look in the rearview mirror. Every action has its pleasures and its price. Socrates. I'd like to give you one more example, if that's okay. This one is kind of fun, and it relates to a theory I have. You might find this far-fetched, so bear with me. I can't prove the first thing about this, but I still find it amusing. Let's go. Let's talk about car design. I don't know too much about cars, but I have eyes, and I can see. For one thing, contemporary cars have grown huge. I suppose this is because of all the equipment and safety devices that even small cars need these days. Some are significantly larger than others. However, some of them are so big they could probably count as trucks, except all they're hauling 95% of the time is the driver. Have you noticed how the design of the fronts of cars has changed over the last 30 years? The face of the cars? What Audi and Toyota have in common? Let's compare some cars from the past with current models. I've chosen an Audi, which is one of the more popular high-end brands, and a Toyota, because this development is not limited to Audi. The left image is of a 1990 Audi. The right is of a 1990 Toyota Corolla, the best-selling car model of all time. Whether these cars are beautiful or nothing special is all in the eye of the beholder, of course. Personally, I'm not too impressed, but I don't think I would have felt the same way 30 years ago. However, these pictures are unlikely to frighten anybody. Here are the Audi and Toyota Corolla from the year 2000s. 10 years later. What's happened? Not too different, eh? still neat and tidy, without any excessive details. The look is a little more modern, but there's nothing here that would cause you to raise an eyebrow. But now look at these fronts from 2010. Still an Audi and a Toyota Corolla. Something has changed this time, but what? Apart from being bigger, the front looks a little aggressive. It looks far from timid, anyway. The headlights are beginning to resemble eyes. Suddenly, you kind of get the feeling the car is looking at you. Go back to the year 2000s and note the difference. If this really is a trend, it may have started at some point between 2000s and 2010. But what comes next? Now let's look at a Toyota Corolla and an Audi. From 2015, it's starting to show, right? These maws are pretty large, and the headlights are like a pair of irritable or even combative eyes, narrowed and wary. There is a distinctly predatory expression to them. These cars will be noticed, and not exclusively in a good way. Their design is intended to communicate two things to the world. A, you have a new car, and B, you're something of a big shot. This is quite the nod to individualism. Look out. So, how do they look in 2020 as I write this? Let's Google Auto Plus Grill Plus 2020. Of course, we'll look at a Toyota Corolla too. On the following page is what I found. Whoa, the kid gloves are off, it seems. These cars look like they want to eat you. Their grills are like angry mouths, threatening to devour everything in their path. You must admit that these car hoods are far more aggressive looking than their ancestors from 1990. These cars look mad too. Put it bluntly, I can definitely see why people would get out of the way when a predator like this appears in their rearview mirror. It also provides an excellent way for the driver to make the first impression they want. If you love your Audi or Toyota, I'm sure these are great cars. You might even reckon they represent the pinnacle of car design. This applies to many other car manufacturers too, but that's not what this is about. I also don't think it's about being trendy either. Cars just look aggressive nowadays. They look ticked off. Testosterone is simmering all over our parking lots. Men are more aggressive than women. There is evidence of this in prisons all over the world. Vehicles are completely inhuman now. If you saw a bunch of new cars driving down the street, you could be forgiven for believing that alien robots had invaded our planet. Some models these days are so over the top that they almost make you want to challenge whoever is behind the wheel to find out how tough they really are. What's more badass, you or your car? This gives us some clues. People wouldn't be buying cars that look like this if they didn't somehow appeal to them. Something about getting into a car like this, rather than one that looks friendly, gives them a feeling they enjoy. In the early 2000s, I had a car my daughter's friends from daycare called the Happy Car. It looked to them like it was smiling. I liked that. I haven't seen any cars like that in a while, though. My own theory, I'm mainly interested in the effects here. A car. Designer and a psychologist might do better at explaining the underlying causes, is that a lot of people basically feel better when they look a little dangerous. It makes them feel a bit tougher than the average person. This could definitely be indicative of a kind of aggression, probably passive aggression in the form of a cocky car, but aggression nonetheless. We also know that narcissists tend to be more aggressive than other people. So what came first? That's an interesting question. I'm sure you would agree the mood in traffic has grown a little testier where you live. It's worth reminding ourselves that there's less elbow room in traffic these days, that people are driving faster, that the risks have become greater, and that traffic violations such as bicyclists going the wrong way on a one-way street or people using parking spots reserved for the handicapped are committed more often in our urban neighborhoods than they used to be. They seem to risk their lives habitually in ways that seem inconceivable to me. Cyclists wear hardly any protective gear, but this doesn't stop them from running red lights to hurl themselves into intersections, seemingly unconcerned about whether they will survive the day. Or do they simply take their safety for granted? Where does all of this lead? This isn't an ironclad conclusion, of course, but it does seem to me that society is getting colder. What else can we expect, if even our cars look pissed off? This makes me wonder, might phenomena like these be generating more aggression? 23. Aggression and collective narcissism. Any person capable of angering you becomes your master. Epictetus. There is a widespread idea that aggression is the same thing as losing your temper frequently. It's not that simple, however. Getting really mad is an emotional state, while aggression is actually a behavior. Punching or insulting somebody who made you angry is a behavior. When you lose, you're cool, you'll often feel like doing all sorts of things, but thanks to your good upbringing, you're unlikely to do more than spit and curse over it. Ideally, you might even address the issue that caused it. Aggression, more or less. Not all narcissists will resort to aggressive behavior, but a fair number will, and this group tends to cause much more trouble than the rest. What would you respond to this question if you were only allowed the answers more or less? Are we seeing more or less aggression in our society than 30 years ago? If you answer sincerely, your answer will be more. But why is that exactly? Perhaps your neighbor bought an angry-looking car. A pretty simple explanation would be that more people were angry than before. That is, they are performing more actions that can be interpreted as aggressive. Amusingly, a fair number of people aren't even bothering to be subtle about it. It's actually a bit of a paradox. Why would a narcissist, whose main objective is to be admired by others, be interested in attacking anybody, whether verbally or physically? Wouldn't that imply that we need to rethink our ideas about narcissism? There is a fairly common idea that suggests that people who like themselves have an easier time liking others. Some psychologists I interviewed for this book even claim that you can't love somebody else if you don't love yourself first. If you like other people, you're not going to be aggressive. However, narcissists can actually become aggressive for this very reason. Usually they feel that their own needs ought to trump everyone else's, and people who get in their way could well become targets for their aggression. Their inability to empathize when others are suffering, along with their sense that people aren't giving them the respect they deserve, make them capable of lashing out at anybody, in any way. But it won't be happening constantly, and maybe not every time. When unprovoked, they behave much like the rest of us. Are narcissism and aggression one and the same? In an American study a few years back, the objective was to find out whether self-esteem, narcissism, and aggression were connected to one another. A series of rather exciting experiments was performed on college students who were asked to write papers and then receive feedback on their work. The people giving the feedback were other students who had been asked to go after their peers and tear their work to shreds. They were told to say things like, "This is the worst writing I've ever read. So awful. Is this the best you can do? Worthless. Poor quality." 80% of students with narcissistic traits became more aggressive than non-narcissists did when they were insulted the same way. Some of the narcissist reactions went way beyond what seems reasonable for some feedback on an essay. Threats of physical violence unless the feedback was changed were made. The teachers, whom one would take to be natural authority figures in this context, weren't spared either. One would think that college and university students, who are adults, would have learned to behave decently to one another. But even so, college professors are assaulted each week by dissatisfied students. Some students have even ended up in jail because of their reactions to things like being given a failing grade for a class they felt certain they would pass. They simply can't accept anything less than the top grade, because that's what they feel they deserve in their own minds. ABC News filmed part of the experiments I just mentioned. One student, let's call him Nick the narcissist, won the whole thing by a landslide. He managed to score a whopping 98 out of 100. The TV team asked him if he really wanted to be featured in their segment. "Absolutely," Nick responded. "I'd love to." A member of the research team took him aside and pointed out to him that he was in danger of seeming like an aggressive narcissist. Perhaps that wasn't the kind of reputation he wanted. Nick the narcissist, however, felt that he looked so good that he was bound to come across well on TV. He was asked if perhaps they might blur his face out at least. No, I want people to see me," Nick explained. "I'd like to have my name mentioned, too. It's a shame," he added, "that you can't reveal my phone number during the broadcast, too." As outrageous as this example is, it still reveals some things to us about the inner workings of narcissists. He didn't mind seeming like a total jerk as long as he got to be seen on TV. Self-esteem and aggression? The same research team investigated the connection between self-esteem and aggressive behavior with the objective of discovering whether narcissism might contribute to acts of aggression. This was tested in a variety of ways, but the conclusion was the same each time. People who exhibit strong self-esteem and narcissistic behavior tended to be more aggressive than others. More, that is, than people with poor self-esteem and high degrees of narcissism, or strong self-esteem but low degrees of narcissism, or people with both poor self-esteem and low degrees of narcissism. When studying kids aged 11 to 13 who displayed strong self-esteem and physically aggressive behavior, the team found that these individuals would simply rationalize their behavior if challenged. They convinced themselves that the kid they beat up was a real jerk, who had somehow actually deserved the beating they received. These bullies' behavior simply made them feel better, superior to their victims. I realize this might not be fun to read. It's a little depressing. Discussing sensitive issues is tricky these days. What am I saying here? More or less any topic can cause controversy today. You see, there are people out there who actively seek out things to be outraged over. They can be pretty organized at times too. Are you? Sitting down? Say hello to the collective narcissists. Collective narcissism. Just think of political slogans like "Make America Great Again," which Donald Trump used in 2016, or "Take Back Control," which was used by the Brexit campaign in Great Britain that same year. These messages were intended to suggest that national sovereignty was somehow impaired in the United States and Great Britain, and that it must be restored as a matter of urgency. What needed to be protected was the nation itself. Because of how complicated politics can get, and because anybody could end up in trouble at any time for practically nothing, I'd like to emphasize that I'm not commenting on the politics as such. Left, right, or anywhere in between, it's nowhere near my area of expertise. However, taking an interest in human behavior, I find myself fascinated with how political messages are communicated. And I'd like to be clear about one thing. Although I just mentioned Trump and Brexit, which generally belong to the right on the political spectrum, I don't think the people on the other side are really any better. Neither the left nor the right has a monopoly on collective narcissism. Who are collective narcissists then? They are individuals who demand that their group be accepted by others without any questions. They possess a heightened sensitivity to any indication that this might not be the case. The core aspect of narcissism is dependence on other people's admiration and recognition. When the same recognition is sought on behalf of a group, the narcissism takes on a collective dimension. Note, these two varieties of narcissism aren't always directly related. Individual narcissists, whether diagnosed or not, are not automatically collective narcissists. Some of them might even be so far gone to narcissism that they're unable to cooperate at all. The group in question could be formed around anything: a political ideology, a specific attitude to taxation, a particular view of feminism, the faith one adheres to, a sports team, climate change, or anything else that can trigger an emotional response. It could also just be a family. If you go after my family, explaining a phenomenon that's making headlines. What are the prevailing attitudes in groups that are characterized by collective narcissism? Here are some common examples. I wish other groups would be much quicker to recognize my own group. My group deserves special treatment. I won't be satisfied until my group gets the recognition it deserves. I demand that my group be given the respect it is due. It makes me really angry when others criticize my group. If my group had significant influence over the world, it would be a better place. It upsets me to see other people overlook the achievements of my group. Far too few people properly appreciate how important my group is. The true value of my group is often misunderstood. Assuming you've kept up with public discourse at all over the last few years, I'd be surprised if you hadn't come across some of the preceding statements being expressed by one side or the other in regard to some issue. When collective narcissists take control, anybody who isn't part of their group had better watch out. This kind of group is always going to be prejudiced, regardless of the members' ages, genders, educational levels, or political ideologies. No group is immune from this. Through some bizarre logic, everybody else suddenly becomes the enemy. Collective narcissists carry around a set of carefully selected prejudices. They attack anybody who poses the slightest threat to the group's grandiose self-image. It's hard for them to accept that people can be oblivious to their self-avowed greatness. Collective narcissists are keen to exact their vengeance on anybody who fails to award the group public recognition as clearly and promptly as they expect. This pattern has actually been tested in a scientific context. In a study, collective narcissists from the United States were asked to read a fabricated interview with a foreign exchange student who made some disparaging remarks about their experiences of studying in the U.S. This entirely fictional exchange student had some opinions about U.S. culture and was troubled by some things he had seen and experienced during his time there. After reading these negative comments about their country, the collective had particularly harsh words for the exchange student's countrymen. They slated an entire nation based on the opinions of a single, fictional individual. Here's the plot twist. Even after the team running the study informed the participants that there was really no exchange student and that the whole thing had been made up for this test, many of the subjects remained agitated anyway. One of them made this comment, "I don't care if it's true or not. It sucks either way." Collective narcissists also tend to perceive slights where nobody else can. Often, you can't even make a joke without offending some group or another. Nothing slips under the radar these days. A well-known British actor stated a few years ago that he was troubled to find out that some of his British colleagues who came from minority backgrounds felt that it could be easier to get work in the United States than in Britain. If you listen to what he said, it's impossible to misinterpret. His intentions, he is undoubtedly siding with his black colleagues. However, he also commits a mistake so unforgivable that it will only ever be noticed by people who are prepared to go to great lengths to take offense. In the interview, he uses the term colored people, the accepted expression at the time. But just before the interview was given, the acceptable term in the United States had become people of color. The actor, who is from England, was not aware of this difference, which is barely noticeable in purely linguistic terms. But that was all it took. Some quarters reacted with such violent rage that he might as well have used the N-word. All hell broke loose, and the actor was suddenly being made out to be some kind of white supremacy activist. How could this happen? He sought absolution. He made a heartfelt apology. Much ado about nothing? Perhaps. But he wasn't prepared to put his career in acting at risk. This is what happens when you accidentally knock over a hornet's nest like this. There are plenty of these examples too. Countless individuals whose careers, relationships, and lives have been ruined by these kinds of efforts. Are these signs of an increasingly narcissistic culture? What would you say? Things were pretty different just a few decades ago anyway. While people may have been suspicious of opinions that differed from their own, deplatforming, cancel culture, and groups that silence those they disagree with are definitely fairly new phenomena. Have the collective narcissist taken over? There seems to be no end to collective narcissists' capacity for taking offense on behalf of their groups. Success for another group, or increasing influence for a minority, can both threaten the position of the majority. Collective narcissists seek to protect the privileges of their own group by undermining the motives of other groups. It's also worth remembering that anybody who seeks recognition for their group is likely to feel that overlooking said group is a serious transgression. According to the logic of collective narcissism, a crime like that must be avenged. I'm using the word avenged quite deliberately here. The whole phenomenon is alarmingly fertile ground for conflict and even violence, as groups of this kind feel maltreated in the course of some political process or another. Collective narcissists are more likely than others to propose retribution for any act that puts their grandiosity into question. Collective narcissists deliberately provoke hostilities between different groups. There doesn't even have to be a legitimate threat in the first place. Since they insist on getting to set the agenda, they are free to invent any threat that might help them demonstrate their power to the world. They feel entitled to be deceptive, as it's for a good purpose. We haven't quite figured out how to address this problem in a constructive way yet. Studies have shown that individual self-esteem in groups of collective narcissists is actually quite low, and that they tend to experience negative emotions. This doesn't match up with individual narcissists, who, as I've covered elsewhere in this book, will tend to have strong self-esteem and think very highly of themselves. The problem then is highly complicated. Collective narcissists will no doubt remain a force to be reckoned with, as long as they're able to weaponize social media for their cause. Engaging with an exaggerated collective self-image seems to be a way for human beings to fulfill their universal need for social belonging. We all want to belong to some group after all. To have any chance of deterring further escalation of hostilities between different groups, we're going to need a better understanding of collective narcissists, as they clearly aren't going anywhere anytime soon. Characteristics of collective narcissism. Within the collective, it's more common for members to be strongly against something than strongly in favor of something. There is often an explicitly negative aspect to what one does and says. The question is this: how can you tell if you've ended up in a group that suffers from collective narcissism? Fortunately, there are signs to look for. Commonly, the group will have singled out a specific issue or problem as their concern. Nothing takes priority over this issue, and everything else is negotiable. They express themselves in incredibly categorical ways. Their views on things are extremely binary, and their arguments lack nuance. You're either with them or against them. Having gathered as a collective, they rarely encourage free thought. The group's leaders will demand that everybody use the right expressions and have the same ideas. Nobody in the group is allowed to question anything. There's no more thinking to be done. We already have all the answers. Individualism is banned. Groupthink dominates everything. You can hear it in the arguments they use. There's such and such a group of people. Those people are like this or like that. The number one objective is for the members to unite behind a single idea rather than unite in harmony. This single idea, whatever it may be, is kept under strict control. Compare it to an orchestra. They all have different instruments which make different sounds. Not all members of the orchestra play all the time. The strings will occasionally pause to wait for the percussionist and so on. But the orchestra is still able to cooperate, as they're all working from the same sheet music. That's not the case with collective narcissism. Here, it is mandated that all the musicians must play the trumpet. This coercive mode of thought is very powerful. You must, you have to, it's a requirement. Everybody has to do the same thing. Think the same thought. Independent thought is an unnecessary evil because the agenda has already been written. The most telling warning sign is when you hear somebody say, "We don't need to listen to them. We already have all the answers." That's all an illusion, of course. Nobody has all the answers. But the point is to avoid dialogue, as it has the potential to cause the group to implode. Anybody who deviates from this will suffer brutal punishment. If you try to sneak off, you'll be seen as a quitter and be mistrusted and disgraced. The group will do anything to prevent its members from breaking with its established norms. If you don't embrace the group's agenda, that makes you evil in their eyes. It's as simple as that. And group members who do this will be punished far more severely than any outsider guilty of the same crime. Does this make logical sense? I'm not sure. The pressure to exhibit loyalty to the group demands open displays of solidarity. Go out and tell the world what we think. Open displays of adherence to the group's ideas are mandatory, whether they actually make sense to you or not. Passivity is a surefire way to attract censure. Within the group, people are expected to adhere to an idealized, whitewashed view of the group itself. They genuinely believe they are the only people to see the world for what it really is, and that their opinion is the only reasonable one. Any objectivity is out the window when it comes to collective narcissism. We're better than them. Any legitimate positive will be amplified and exaggerated. Any negative will be suppressed and downplayed. Collective narcissists display some of the same traits as individual narcissists. And so aggression breeds like bacteria in warm weather. Raging fury is just one ill-formed thought away. The group is extremely testy and irritable and keeps getting into conflicts. The following is useful to keep in mind. For anyone who likes to question and discuss political dogma, if you pick on one of them, the whole group will turn on you. It's like walking up to a beehive and punching one of tens of thousands of bees. You might not survive being attacked by their 9,999 friends. Consequences. There's no way you could force your way into a group like this, even if you wanted to. It's too tightly knit. Nobody will care about your contribution as a unique individual. You have to be part of the group to count. This phenomenon appears here and there in contemporary society, with just about any issue worth discussing, along with a great number that don't merit any kind of attention. We're seeing a pattern emerge in which a certain group acts so deliberately aggressively that it becomes clear that the last thing they really want is debate. What they want is to destroy their imagined enemies. The enemy could be another group that holds another opinion. Or it could be a group that has no opinion at all about the issue in question, but has for some reason been singled out as the enemy by the narcissistic collective. The enemy could also be individuals who may or may not actually have taken some controversial stand, or who haven't actually opened their mouths at all, but are unfortunate enough to belong to the wrong group. If they get picked up by the swarm's radar, they could be done for. Can you do anything about this? Let's assume you know yourself well. You know how to stay strong enough in yourself to never resort to behavioral narcissism, and you don't go around making enemies. Does that mean you're safe? No, because you're still living in the same world as the rest of us. It's hard to resist this cultural development if you don't pay close attention. I warned you earlier not to challenge a true narcissist. The same advice applies here. Create distance and then maintain it. Don't take unnecessary risks. If you'd like to go over that advice again, you'll find it in Chapter 16, Breaking Free from a Narcissist. However, you should also be on the lookout for collective patterns that can sometimes arise spontaneously within the population. In medieval Europe, many women were tortured and put to death simply because they had been accused of being witches. Today, we marvel over how this could happen and shake our heads at the sheer madness of it. But the fact remains that some people managed to convince the public that some women could use witchcraft to ruin harvests or cause ships to sink at sea. Somebody accused a specific woman and the notorious witch trial was performed. She was thrown into a lake with her hands tied behind her back. The reasoning was that if she really was a witch, the lake would refuse to take her and she would float back up to the surface. If she wasn't a witch, the lake would accept her with open arms. Regardless of the outcome, the woman would die. Whoever came up with that solution was a real class act. More than 150,000 women were murdered before people realized that this wasn't okay. How can crazy ideas like this take root at all? And why would anybody listen to this kind of madness? The answer is simply that collective narcissism existed in the past too. People would unite over some idea, whether logical, fabricated, or simply evil and malicious. They would decide to make this idea their truth. Then they would start eliminating anybody who disagreed. Disturbed lies are taken as truth in order to execute power, and nobody dares speak up. The collective has grown so strong at this point that simply asking questions can be dangerous. These patterns also exist within some of our contemporary political movements. Social media is fertile ground for this kind of behavior. I'd advise you to be cautious when it comes to groups like this. It can be a good idea to study their claims more extensively before you decide that they sound reasonable. Also, you should pay attention to how any movement treats non-members. Remember, people have always disagreed about various issues. That's not the remarkable part. Basically, the point where things get weird is when a group wants to destroy anybody who disagrees with them. It's unhealthy, it's dangerous, and you want nothing to do with a movement like that. Think what you want, believe what you like, and promote any values that are important to you. What matters here are not the specifics of your chosen way of life, but you should remember that it's unhealthy for a group to begin to view its opponents as subhuman and feel entitled to do anything in its power to destroy them. That kind of thing can cause wars, bloody revolutions, and tyrannical dictatorships. In Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union, and Maoist China, it led to the mass murder of tens of millions of human beings. When you start silencing people and making them submit to your demands regarding the words they use, you're already heading for a disaster. 24. How did we end up here? There are always four sides to a story. Your side, their side, the truth. And what really happened. Jean-Jacques Rousseau. So far, it definitely seems like the concept of cultural narcissism reflects something real. Let's assume that it is a trend in society. Where did it come from? Did it appear out of nowhere? What's the hen here and what's the egg? At some point, this all began when somebody decided that the rules others have to live by didn't apply to them. But when was that exactly? There are competing theories for how we ended up where we are right now. When it comes to a starting point, I agree with those researchers who have looked for causes all the way back in the 1970s. I can't give you a specific year, as this theory isn't too precise. However, during the 1970s, many of the inhibiting and restrictive ideals of the early 1950s were abandoned. Fashion changed as the 70s progressed. Tapered suits gave way to extremely flared trousers and huge spectacles, loud colors. It's no coincidence that cars were often lime green, bright orange, or deep blue back in the 70s. But regardless of how loud the colors were, they didn't have the aggressive demeanors of the cars we know today. The glamorous 70s. Somehow, finally, the freedom to be whoever you wanted had arrived. In my part of the world, the old world if you will, we have in many respects taken after the United States. Much of this began in the 50s and 60s. Women entered the workplace in force, and the service economy underwent explosive growth. Santa Claus began to get more media coverage than Jesus Christ. The economy was booming, and most people were better off than before. It spread to my part of the world too. In war-weary old Europe, hope was burning more brightly than ever. Personally, I have mixed feelings about the 70s. I grew up during the Cold War, and I felt a numbing fear of nuclear war as a child. I read of the horrors of Nazi Germany and the Second World War throughout my school years. The successors to this abysmal legacy, Communist China and the Soviet Union, were another nightmare altogether. On the other hand, perhaps it wasn't too strange that people saw better times ahead after the time the world had just spent at rock bottom. Somewhere around this point, people from various groups began to stand up and demand their rights. Black people fought to end discrimination. Women started their epic struggle to be judged on equal terms with men. There are many examples of movements that have done a lot of good and set a tone for the future that followed. They made the world a better place. Of course, this is an extremely, almost unforgivably abbreviated account of history, but society slowly began to shift from an ethos of conformism to one of nonconformism. Drug culture and hippies in the 1960s, the student revolts of 1968, all highly nonconformist, I'd say. Introversion falls out of fashion. Bring on the extroverts. I started school in 1972. At some point during my years of elementary and middle school, our collective focus shifted from introversion to extroversion. I would always talk too much, and my parents kept getting told that although I did well enough in terms of academic performance, I was too talkative. Could you ask him to stop doing that? Although it's worth pointing out that it was the teacher who asked the parents to solve. The problem, the opposite, seems more common today. This pattern changed when we were a little older. At first, the more extroverted kids would be told to sit still and listen, but as time went by, introverted kids were gradually encouraged to step up and claim more of the space, own the room. I'm afraid I can't say when this happened, but this is the problem anyway. Extroverts didn't like sitting down and being quiet, and introverts wanted nothing more than to do precisely that. If you ask me, both these views are incorrect. Both approaches discriminated against about half of the kids. The interesting thing, though, is that this shift occurred at all. After teachers previously preached humility, the opposite became the ideal. Everybody was supposed to be engaging in self-promotion. Is this a consequence of encouraging everybody to invest in themselves? Where I grew up, we saw a shift from a norm of introversion to a norm of extroversion. Now everybody has to do some self-promotion. The human potential movement. Initially, people fought for specific groups who they felt had suffered from discrimination. Then the focus shifted to the human potential movement. The purpose of this movement wasn't really to promote any kind of self-admiration. The goal was to promote the utility of introspection. In California, members of the movement began to hold seminars based on psychologist Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. 1. Physiological needs: food, water, air, shelter. 2. Safety needs: security, stability. 3. Social belonging needs: family, friends, love. 4. Esteem needs: self-esteem, power, recognition. 5. Self-actualization needs: becoming anything you want. Maslow suggested early on that nobody could skip any steps along this hierarchy. This issue has been much discussed, but there is reasonable consensus at this point that this is the most promising idea. It's hard to get things done when you don't have food and water. Being afraid won't help you form a social bond. Improving your self-esteem is hard to do without having people around. In his day, Maslow claimed to have met very few people who were genuinely located at the top level, self-actualization. This makes perfect sense if you consider that self-actualization is a particularly complicated concept, derived from a series of equally complicated points of view. However, Maslow positioned self-esteem just beneath self-actualization. Self-actualization is difficult. Self-esteem is simple in comparison, as more and more individuals took an increasing interest in their own growth. They replaced the almost hopeless goal of self-actualization with the far more accessible concept of self-esteem. And why shouldn't they? Going over the available literature on this subject, I find endless information and ideas about self-esteem in books, magazines, documentary films, and even children's shows, but precious little about self-actualization. Maybe Maslow was right after all. Self-actualization is hard to achieve. The emergence of the self-help industry. In the end, the goals for collective growth of the 1960s were abandoned in favor of a more alluring emphasis on the self. The stage was set for self-investment to become the zeitgeist. It was time to make more room for me in the world. This is really quite a logical development, considering that individualism had never been practiced in any seriously organized form before. We had to try it out sooner or later. In this context, reference is often made to writer Tom Wolfe, who pointed out that rather than spending our newly won financial gains on improving the world, we spend our money on self-help instead. One of the big winners here was EST. Yep, it's a lowercase acronym, or Erhard Seminars Training. Hundreds of thousands of people spent there. Hard-earned money on classes promising to teach them how to put themselves first, how to explain to others that we are all ultimately responsible for our own fates, and how nobody should ever accept victimhood, as you can always shape your future. Note, this is not narcissism. I'm firmly committed to these ideas myself. I have no doubt whatsoever that we can form our futures as we see fit, as long as we make it our main priority. I'm also fully on board with the notion that the responsibility for my own well-being lies mainly with myself. There are plenty of examples of people who have come to this realization, stopped waiting for the world to come and rescue them, and set to work improving themselves, their families, their occupations, and their lives. So far, this is all uncontroversial stuff. Self-help is so ingrained in society today that it's hard to say where it begins and ends. School kids are learning yoga. Inmates are taking mindfulness classes. People hire coaches for all kinds of things. To sum the message up in basic terms, you can do it. The seeds of this can actually be found in one of the best-selling nonfiction books of all time, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. It was published back in 1937, and some sources claim it has sold an incredible 170 million copies worldwide. In brief, the book claims that a strong mental focus is all you need to achieve anything you want, including curing serious diseases, getting as rich as you could ever want to, being universally loved and praised. The sky's the limit, really. Another huge international literary hit was The Secret by Australian author Rhonda Byrne. Since its publication in 2006, it has sold a staggering 30 million copies globally. The message of this book is that you can have anything you want as long as you want it enough. Think about something hard enough, and it will come to pass. However, on further consideration, one soon realizes that this message is actually a lot older than that. Didn't Jesus say something about faith, moving mountains in the Bible? Who knows how old it is, really? In any case, the methods used to achieve maximum happiness and success and become the best version of yourself are constantly changing. And this has nothing to do with the self-help industry. However, there is a trail for us to pick up here, which will take us straight to something that nobody could have predicted. Because what happens when you want a happy, carefree life but don't? Quite feel like rolling up your sleeves and doing the actual work? When keeping a log of everything you do, eat, and think seems like too much trouble? When you can't quite motivate yourself to organize your messy thoughts and would just like to have that luxurious, fabulous lifestyle immediately, thank you very much. What then? This is where the vague concept of narcissistic culture starts to become more distinct, wanting to have everything for nothing. The simplest way, I guess, is to just pretend you're already there. It suits narcissists very well to conjure up these visions of success and then try to convince themselves that they have already achieved them and live as though this were true. I'm not suggesting that accepting your fate and going on living in misery is somehow a better option. If you manage to identify a problem in your life and decide to solve it, I will be the first to cheer you on. But reading a book about self-actualization and then putting it down, And thinking to yourself that you already knew all that stuff won't do anything for you. You won't see any results unless you start trying out the methods suggested in the book. There will be no improvement and the problem will remain, assuming it doesn't get worse. The potential narcissist we all carry a version of inside ourselves is all about the destination and wouldn't mind skipping the journey. It's a bit like having easier access to a source of money than is actually good for you. I can borrow money, buy myself a fancy lifestyle, and pretend I earned it all, rather than actually working for what I want. At some point, even somebody with narcissistic tendencies will have to face the fact that there are no free lunches. Whenever you get what you want, you'll always be paying for it in some form or another. 25. Self-esteem more trouble than your worth. Whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster. Friedrich Nietzsche. I dedicated a significant portion of the earlier chapters of this book to the subject of self-esteem. Let's take a quick look and see if that discussion has any tie-ins with our current circumstances. Essentially, of course, self-esteem being on the rise in the world is good news. People who are content with themselves are healthier, suffer from physical and mental illness less often, live longer, are more productive, and cause fewer problems for other people. Meanwhile, there is a group who is experiencing increasing unhappiness, a fact that is blamed on social media. The abundance of opportunities. Social media offers for comparisons with the very best, most attractive, richest, and most popular people on the planet is not necessarily a positive. In his book, 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos, Canadian psychologist Jordan B. Peterson writes that we shouldn't compare ourselves with one another so much as with our own past selves. Naturally, we can learn many lessons from those who have already achieved success at something. But this is only true as long as it motivates you and feeds you the energy you need to keep working towards your own goals. There is a real danger that you might demotivate yourself if you keep comparing yourself with those incredibly successful people. It could stifle your future performance rather than inspire you to improve it. It's easy to imagine that you'll never be as great or successful as them, and if that's the case, you'd be better off competing with your own past self. That way, with a bit of luck, you'll see some change for the better. The line between these two attitudes is incredibly fine, so keep your wits about you. And remember to think. Before the internet, you might have compared yourself to your brother, neighbor, buddy, or that guy in the next town over who made a fortune doing something or other. Nowadays, we can access information about the absolute elite in any discipline, anywhere in the world. At the simple press of a button, we can find out what the #1 practitioner of some craft or another is up to, how much money they've earned, their current lifestyle, exactly how happy their kids are, and so on. It's all available for public viewing. It's like comparing a 10-year-old girl who dreams of being a singer with Beyoncé. Is that comparison inspiring or deflating? If we adopt the wrong attitude at the outset and spend too much time worrying about what others are getting up to, we'll run the risk of suffering full-on burnout. This can, doubtlessly, cause your self-esteem to crumble, especially if you keep looking at people who've actually earned their success. That's the main threat to some people's contentment. After all, it would be easier to accept that somebody won a fortune in the lottery. How can that be easier to accept? Well, basically, because we believe that we could win the lottery too. But that person who spent 20 years working like a maniac, making endless sacrifices along the way, never going to parties, never buying a BMW, but constantly investing everything into the vision they formed and remained true to, and then actually going on to be successful, and maybe even famous, making the big money, that person is a serious threat. My own achievements won't look very impressive next to theirs. Strong self-esteem equal to success in life? For the longest time, I believed that this was the case. Now, we could certainly define success in a variety of ways. Whether a person thinks of themselves as successful is a highly personal matter. I go over the topic of how you might define success for yourself in some detail in my last book. Surrounded by setbacks, so this time around I'll settle for stating that the definition of success will vary depending on whom you ask. However, there will be interesting insights to consider. Different psychological tools associate an individual's core values with a variety of personal characteristics, and self-esteem is often one of them. A decade or so ago, an extensive study was carried out on subjects from a variety of professions. and my own self-analysis put me somewhere in the middle of the pack. My self-esteem is neither remarkably high nor alarmingly poor. It's fine. Just between you and me, I kind of expected and hoped to score higher. I asked my contact which professional group usually scored the highest for self-esteem. When I was prompted to guess, I suggested that maybe it was elite-level athletes, or perhaps corporate management at some of the larger or more well-known organizations, professors holding prestigious positions at esteemed universities. You see, I associated strong self-esteem with actual achievement. My contact shook her head. The answer was something else entirely: pig farmers. They were, for all practical purposes, extremely content with themselves and felt that they had nothing to prove to anybody. They weren't at all interested in, say, what others might think of their chosen careers. According to this model, high achievers in most areas tend to be individuals with poor self-esteem, who feel that they have a lot to prove. They're never satisfied with anything, so they keep working hard. Is this a good or a bad thing? It's hard to say. There is some correlation between self-esteem and quality of performance, but studies have shown that we may have gotten the wrong idea about how they are related. It seems that better performances lead to better self-esteem rather than the other way around. I have to confess that my own assumptions about this were wrong all along. Now, success and achievement certainly aren't everything in life. People can be satisfied, with far less, of course. Managing to avoid getting all worked up over nothing can also be taken as a measure of success. And if your self-esteem is strong, you'll probably find it easier to appreciate and be grateful for the things you already have. Besides, there are other factors at work here that are skewing these results. Young members of the upper classes, for example, tend to have better self-esteem and higher grade point averages than working class kids. Some individuals who struggle with their self-esteem are poor achievers, but this appears to be caused by childhood issues such as living with parents who are addicts. Basically, it's difficult to identify any automatic connection between strong